All right, I want to call this meeting of the State Allocation Board to order. Can you call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal. Here. Senator Hancock. Senator Huff. Assemblymember Fuller. Here. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Torlakson. Scott Harvey. Present. Kathleen Moore. Here. Lynn Green. Here. Cynthia Bryant.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I feel like you're all so far away. There's no objections on all of our items that have votes, I want to hold them open until our members can come. Everyone should be here at some point except for Senator Huff, who's not going to make it today. If that's all right with everyone. We had a presentation, but I don't see either one of our presentees here, so should we pass that item? Okay. I just wanted to note a couple of changes to the agenda today. I've asked staff to present the report that's in tab 20, which is a description of the process they used to create the list prior to item 11. Items 9, 10, and 15 have been pulled to allow more time to develop those items. Yeah, they're already crossed off your agenda. I'd also would like to pull item 21 in the reports on the financial hardship regulations. The board directed staff at the last meeting to come back to a future board meeting on the hardship issue in the same spirit that we approached the other unplugging of the clock, so to speak, for the school districts impacted by the bond sale PMIA for further discussion by the board. The item in our binders doesn't do that, and I intend to, over the next month, work with staff to develop an item and options that will help the board set policy in this area as decided and directed in February. My understanding is there are a number of stakeholders here in the audience with an interest in this item. I want to encourage those of you who haven't written comments to send them to us as soon as possible. Just as I was walking out of my office, I got two very thoughtful letters that had lots of information in them, which I really appreciate, although I have to admit I didn't have time to read them. I'll also be happy to meet with anyone if you would like to between now and the next meeting. And in addition, we also have a public comment section at the end of the agenda, which would be approximately the same time as we would have reached item 21 anyway. So if you would like to make public comments then, or you can hold them for when we return with the item, hopefully at the next meeting. If there aren't any objections from board members, that would be the agenda for the day.
If I may,
Ms. Moore?
it's just reiterate support of what you are indicating. I think that the direction to staff was very clear last month that we did approve a portion, 1 and 3 of that agenda, and that we definitely wanted the hardship projects to be treated in the same manner as all other projects during this time of crisis, and I appreciate your taking the leadership on that.
Thank you. Next item is tab 2, the minutes. I personally have not had time to read the minutes, and if it's not a problem with everyone, can we put them over and approve them next time? Because I actually usually like to read them. And tab 3, our executive officer statement from Lisa Silverman.
Good afternoon. I'd like to share with the board today is a few items, one of them being an update on the bond sale. At the March 11th, we were notified that this program will be receiving $376 million in Proposition 1D. So that's great news. Additionally, we understand that Treasurer's Office is conducting a sale this week in taxable bonds, and so we're hopeful that this will result in additional funds in the program. We are working closely with the Treasurer's Office to expedite certification with the goal of providing apportionments at a future meeting. An update on the town halls. Together with DSA, the Office of Public School Construction have had 3 town hall meetings in March, specifically March 5th on a furlough Friday at Butte County Office of Education, March 12th at Merced County Office of Education, and March 19th at the Orange County Office of Education. The OPSC staff presented workshops on expediting application processing for career tech applications and audit process and tips for navigating through an audit successfully. Additionally, some news we'd like to share with you. Our office will be relocating to Department of General Services in West Sacramento, and that move will be, our move will take place, and we will be setting up shop by March 29th, which is Monday. We also want to provide you an update on the seismic mitigation program projects. In this agenda, we'll be presenting a project for Piedmont Unified School District, request for an unfunded approval for the school facility program, facility hardship rehabilitation project that would provide seismic strengthening to the Piedmont High School. This represents the third seismic mitigation program project and the second for Piedmont Unified School District. Last item is we wanted to share with you an updated tentative work plan. For purposes of transparency and workload management, staff has attached a tentative workload for planning purposes for future state allocation board meetings. With that, I close my statements.
Okay, any questions or comments for Ms. Silverman? I was going to say one quick thing. I did just another thing right when I was walking out the door. I saw a news article from Bloomberg Press saying that the state treasurer is 36% ahead of himself on the bond sale that he's currently in the middle of. So maybe we'll even have more good news in a week or so about our program. Senator Lowenthal?
Well, this is just to one of the things about the executive officer for, Ms. Silverman. I just want to clarify, even though we didn't go over the minutes, we're going to hold them off until next week. I want to be clear that last week, our last meeting, we had a long discussion about the role of the audit subcommittee. And we said that part of what the audit subcommittee does is to look over the scope of audits. And then Mr. Patton, our attorney, said to us that, well, it's real clear, I believe, in the thing, he mentioned that both the State Allocation Board and also OPSC have the authority to weigh in on what sort of process, what it is. He did not want us in this to micromanage and to be real. So I want to be real clear, even though we haven't gone through the minutes, that our audit subcommittee will be looking in general at the scope of the audits, and that's really what we're doing. And I think that's really what came out of the discussion. But we're not to micromanage and go through all, but to lay out what the processes are, what is generally expected of everyone in an audit. That we can do, and what the criteria are. But we're not going to go through all the specifics. And so, but laying that out, that scope of the kinds of things that would be needed in an audit or required, is what that audit subcommittee, and that's what Mr. Patton also told us we can do last week, though he did not want us to micromanage and go through all the dots and to go through each specific audit. And we agreed that was not what we were going to be doing. I just want to be clear.
Mr. Harvey?
Thank you very much. Senator, I know you're dealing on this issue in good faith, as am I. And I think over time we're going to be very, very mindful of the kind of information that informs and enriches what we're doing. But when it's all said and done, I do believe Mr. Patton pointed out that the DGS director controls the division of OPSC. It's part of his department. It's administratively his, and very clearly in statute, OPSC is recognized as his. So when it's all said and done, I'm hoping we can suggest to him things that might inform and improve the audit process, but it really will be his call.
But he did also say that it's his opinion that both entities, he's talking about OPSC and the State Allocation Board, have the authority to weigh in on what sort of process ought to be followed, because the statute does not specify that one or the other has the exclusive authority. Those are his own terms.
Well, we read things a little differently. All I'm saying is Ron Dietrich, our director, is a man of good faith as well. I'm sure he will enjoy hearing from the audit subcommittee on things that he should consider as he directs OPSC in this audit process. But when it's all said and done, it will be his choice.
Okay, any other comments on the executive officer's report? Okay, tab 4. This is a resolution. Who's presenting on this? Looks like I am. Is that what your attention was? This is a delegation of authority to the acting executive officer, Lisa Silverman, that gives her the authority to submit regulations on our behalf to the Office of Administrative Law. We ran into an issue with the regulations that we adopted last meeting. They accepted them from her, but we just need to formalize it with a resolution. So, is there a motion? Second?
Second.
You call the roll?
Senator Lorenzo?
Aye.
Assemblymember Fuller? Assemblymember Torlakson? Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore? Lynn Green?
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant?
Aye.
Carries.
And then you'll leave it open for the other members. Thank you. The next is consent, tabs 5, 6, 7, and 8. Is there any, is there any public comment on any of the consent items? Is there a motion on these? A second?
Second.
Can you call the roll?
Senator Lorenzo?
See, which one is this now, tab 5?
Consent 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Aye.
Assemblymember Fuller? Assemblymember Torlakson? Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore? Lynn Green?
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant?
Aye.
It carries, but I'll hold it open.
Thank you. Okay, the next is the report from tab 20, which we're going to hear before we get to tab 11. So 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this next item is to give the board a general overview of the process by which unfunded list is determined. But before we get into that discussion, I want to give the board an overview of just the process in general. Basically, the OPSC reviews and processes application on a first-in, first-out basis. We do have some programs that are cycle-driven, so they do have some deadlines, and applications have to be submitted by a certain date. We review and then process all of them and take them to a certain board. But for the most part, it's on a first-in, first-out basis. When an application is submitted to our office, we do an initial check for completeness. What we do is we work with districts to identify that all of the components are submitted with the application. If there's certain things that are missing, we work with districts to get those different components submitted. Once the application is deemed that it's complete, we send districts a notification with the letter the application is complete. We then move into our analysis part of the review. What we do is we take a look at the application and identify any kind of information that we need. We may request further justification for certain grants. We also identify grants that the district may be eligible for, but they didn't request. This is where we get into what we call our 15-day letter. We identify these issues on a letter. We give districts an opportunity to respond and provide additional information. Once a district submits the response, we then do another analysis, and then we get into what we call our 4-day letter. Basically, the 4-day letter, at this point, most of the issues are resolved, and it's a matter of either concurring or withdrawing with the application. In this review, we also ask whether projects have a labor compliance program. One of the reasons why we ask is because right now we have funds available under 3 propositions. We have them available on Proposition 47, Proposition 55, and Proposition 1D. Proposition 47 and 55 has provisions that allow for additional grant for labor compliance programs. So when we ask a project, a district, if they have a labor compliance program, we'll fund them out of Proposition 47 or 55. If not, then we'll fund them out of Proposition 1D. This is something that's come into question lately because we have recent sold bonds on specified bond sources. So generally speaking, we assign bonds from the older bond funds first, but right now, because we do have bonds from 47, 55, and 1D, and knowing that we have a labor compliance component out of Proposition 47 and 55, we'll assign them out of Proposition 47, 55 if they have a labor compliance program. If not, they get assigned a Proposition 1D fund source. Once all of this is evaluated, we then present it to the board for an unfunded approval. Now, most of you know we started to have this unfunded approval back in March of 2009. The shell that we call is an item that we present to the board. This funding shell is what is typically part of the consent item. In there, we have the total project cost, we have the assigned bond fund, and all the relevant information per project. Now, we assign projects on the unfunded list based on receive date. There are a few exceptions to that. One of which is that we put the facility hardship projects, these are the projects that are health and safety issues, to the top of the list. And then other projects that may have received a date change, where the board may have granted a change from one month to another, they'll get placed on top of the list. But for the most part, it's based on OPSC receive date, with the exception of those projects, again, that are health and safety issues or that had a date change by the board. So that's just a general overview of how we do our processing and then how the projects are assigned to the unfunded list. We have about $2 billion worth of projects on the unfunded list since March of 2009. So we thought that we'd give the board just a general overview of what that unfunded list is before we get into the discussion of the CCI adjustments. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions on the process.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Ms. Moore?
I have a question and a comment. Mr. Morales, I thought I heard you say, and I just wanted to confirm it, that facility hardship projects go to the top of the list. Is that correct, or is that correct?
It's the top of the boards of each month approvals.
And that is how we've functioned. I thought, and that's why I was asking for clarification, I thought that the facility hardship projects went to the top of the list.
No, it's at the top of each board's approvals. They go to the top of that month's list. So if we have 20 projects that are presented for the March board, and if we have 2 facility hardships, they'll go to the top of that board's approval list.
So we could have a situation then, as we have funding become available, that there would be facility hardship projects that have to wait in line for that funding in the same manner. They'd simply be at the top of whatever month they might have occurred at. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that by regulation that we do that? And I'm just wondering if it is not by regulation, is it something that we should maybe consider in the future about, are these truly our most needy projects because they are a facility hardship, and should they be funded before others? I don't know, but I wonder that.
To answer your first question, it's not by regulation. It's a policy decision that the board can certainly make in terms of what constitutes a priority to be placed on the unfunded list. This is the way that we've been doing it since March of '09, but again, it's not written in regulation in terms of the order.
I just wonder, because of those facility hardships are typically egregious situations, and we find them based on health and safety. I think you have to qualify on that and under that criteria. And I, for one, I think would like a discussion at the board, particularly not this board, but that perhaps we discuss it. It may remain the same way that has been current practice, but I think it should be discussed as we have limited funds to work with, whether there is a top priority or not. And then my second is a comment, and that is of, I guess, list integrity is what how I would list it, and because of the situation that we are in with the crisis of meting out funding over time is where we are now. The list becomes very critical and crucial, and I think that districts watch it very closely. And what I've seen is that now we have another issue that districts don't control, and that could actually control when they get funded, and that is what bond funds they're assigned. And that bond fund assignment I know in good faith the staff does it to the betterment of the program. They're giving 47 and 55 to those projects that may have a labor compliance component, and I think that was a good policy decision when it was made. But what it actually can have happen is that because of that assignment, particularly now we only have 1D funds that were done by this last bond sale, a project may be skipped over purely because of its bond fund assignment. And I think that we should come back and also provide options about how we can solve that issue, because inherently I think it's not fair to the district that we arbitrarily kind of assigned a bond fund, and because of that, they might not get, another project gets funded earlier.
Hi, I know we had provided you some background about this issue. We know, I mean, it's very critical that there are no pots of money or various funds that are missed from any allocation, or, you know, the goal is to get the money out, and I hear your question. Specifically, we were working closely together with Department of Finance and trying to mitigate the issue. We're hopeful that this week, the bond sale, identifying that at the last sale it was just 1D exclusively, we're hoping that the cash we get to the program will definitely make it an even playing field. So, I mean, we are working very close to you with this issue, and definitely it does raise a concern for all of us.
So that, if I may, when we come back with real funds to apportion in April, I hope that that is the case, that we are moving down that list date by date, so that districts are receiving funding in the date order that they are. And if we are not able to do that because of our consideration, because of our policy decision around bond fund assignment, then I think that we should be brought back a solution to that as well.
And I'll commit to working with staff on that too. I'm also sensitive to this issue, and I think what we might end up with is when we come back, and if we, knock on wood, we can come back by April. We still haven't been given the official green light yet, but if we come back in April and we're only able to do 1D, and this new sale provides the fill-in for 47 and 55, maybe we can lay it out to show the board so that the board feels comfortable that by the time we finish apportioning these 2 rounds of bond sales, that we're pretty much even at the bottom. I think that's my goal. I know it's staff's goal, and the department, my department is working to try to make sure that but we may end up with, you know, glitches like we did last time. We'll make sure that the board understands those, and that we explain it, and we can fix it if we can.
Can I seek clarification, because I'm wanting to make sure that I also have clear direction and understanding things. Ms. Moore, are you asking for staff to internally work this out and come out with a report on suggestions, or work with Department of Finance? Or are you actually asking for it to come back and it to be a policy discussion in regards to financial hardship and their placement on the unfunded list, and then 2, a discussion on the list integrity and what it should look like, so that there are policy changes and discussions at the board?
On financial hardship, I think that there should be a discussion at the board. Yes, that was the one.
Are you asking for a policy discussion or just a report?
I think a policy discussion. It's a policy issue that, it's a policy issue. Is there a priority of projects? Our financial
Hardship. Facility hardship,
thank
right.
you.
Sorry,
Our
facility.
facility hardship
My fault.
projects, by virtue of health and safety, should they be at the top of the list? I'm not saying I have the answer for that, but I think that we should have a discussion about it as we met out funds for projects.
So you're asking it to be an action item, potentially?
I would think if we want to make a policy change, we'd have to have an action item, so yes.
Okay.
The second piece is, I think the chair has said we'll work to ensure that issue. If we don't have a solution to that issue and we come back in April and it does look like we are hopping over projects to fund other ones because of this bond fund assignment, I would want solutions to that. And, I can think of, is it possible to have the assignment be able to come out of any bond source? Now, I know that then that's difficult to track them over time, but we have a cumulative tracking that we're doing on these bonds, 47, 55, and 1D. Is it the cumulative track that we do? But I think it's an important enough issue that for the integrity of that list, and that everybody that watches it quite closely, that they see that they're funded as they were put in line.
Mr. Harvey?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions myself, and I too appreciate what Member Moore has said about the policy discussion, because I think it is timely to take a look at whether or not we should rearrange who we fund and how we fund, because we've got apportionments available, but they're sitting. We said before there was 300 and something that just got allocated. We got 600 million that was approved and authorized before. And I think we continue to talk about getting the money out, creating jobs, making schools safer, and there's got to be a way of preserving the integrity of that list. So if somebody's not quite ready to go yet, they can still stay in place, but somebody who may be shovel-ready, for example, or hardship-ready would move up on that list. So my request would be that if we're looking at potentially changing the way in which we prioritize our projects, that we look at those that create jobs, those that are shovel-ready, as well as the category you're looking at. I'd like some different options to look at.
As I'm sitting here, I think I have a suggestion. I think maybe if it's okay with everyone, we create some sort of a subcommittee a little bit to work with staff on this issue. So besides just me, I'm thinking of you for one, so that we can make sure, because I think all of us want to do this apportionment in April if we get the go-ahead from the state treasurer, and all of us want to do it again in May if we can. And I think staff is going to want to have good policy reads, and it's complicated for them to sort the list and make changes. And I think if we could,
I'd be happy to work with you.
Yeah, and maybe Mr. Harvey too, not to just do all the us wonky types, but maybe it'd be easier if all of us wonky types did it, and just really made sure that what staff brings back gets this notion throughout the system. If that's okay with everyone, we can go through this.
And just to make sure that we're abundantly clear, so the subcommittee, is that discussing just the list, or is also facility hardship included in that discussion? Or
Just talking about the list for the moment.
List for the moment,
Yeah.
and then facility hardship.
I don't see why that facility hardship can't be brought back when we redo item 21. It seems to lend itself to that discussion.
So we should expect it as a discussion next month, along with the same 180.
Cynthia, I would disagree that facility hardship and item 21 are the same. I think they're very different items. But as I heard, facility, that's financial hardship.
I keep calling it financial hardship.
That's financial hardship.
Facility hardship.
Facility hardship is, I've had to abandon my facility because it's in a dangerous situation, and therefore I'm seeking facility hardship funding. It's a health and safety issue, and I just ask the policy, I just ask of us to ask the policy question of ourselves, are those our top priority? They may not be, and we may not have any ability to change that, but I thought it was a timely decision to make because of health and safety.
So that it would come back as an action item to discuss facility hardship and where its priority is on the unfunded list, based on what we can do within statute and regulations.
And also shovel-ready.
And then separately, shovel-ready, and are
Or
you...
any other recommendations that you may come up.
And that's the subcommittee that the chair has requested set up. Are we looking to have a discussion come back in April on that?
Can I raise that point? I'd like to get both of your reactions, Ms. Kaplan and Ms. Silverman. We have had an extraordinary request to move you all in a 2-week period, and we're going to get it done. But I don't know what this does to your preparation for an April agenda, other than perhaps apportioning the dollars. I think we should meet and apportion, but I want to make sure I'm sensitive to the disruption you are all going to face in this alleged box move, which is quite difficult, and we appreciate your understanding and patience, but tell me, can you do more than a portion in April and do it well?
Right. Well, obviously, we're going to be, like you said, moving this weekend, and so obviously our IT system is going to be one of the
Right.
first items to be moving over. That is going to be very delicate. Unfortunately, we have an old system. So there will potentially be challenges. We're hopeful that we will have a green light and it wakes up when it should wake up. So I agree, we're going to have some limitations potentially because we do have processing cutoff timelines. And the goal would be to come back and provide apportionments. In the spirit of that, I think we can meet that obligation.
And just for an example, I'm a one-man show, but we did move because of the move and because of the work on OPSC staff, the implementation committee, which is supposed to be April 1st, next Thursday, to the 8th because we are supposed to be preparing the items this week, but of course we're moving, of which we had 8 days' notice. So I do know the staff that OPSC has for implementation committee is pushed back, which also pushes it back to when we're developing board agenda items at the same time.
Just wanted to be sensitive, and I'm sure you will all work it out. Can I ask, you talked about working with finance and the treasurer to make sure this next allocation is more balanced. Would a letter from the board help you in that advocacy or not? Because if you think it would help, I would perhaps suggest that we give you that to gird up the argument for fairness.
I mean, anything would help, I'm sure, at this point in time, but we definitely work closely with Cynthia's staff at the Department of Finance and the Treasurer's Office. So, I mean, any support, I'm sure, would be great support for having a good solution for our program.
We could do that. Mr.
I'll leave that to you. One more comment.
Oh, sorry.
Does staff at this point have a recommendation? This looks like it's an action item, and you say option 1 or 2. Are we being asked?
We haven't gone to, we're still on item.
We're
not
on
item
Tab
4.
20.
We're on tab 20.
We're on tab 20.
Yeah.
We're just on a
Yeah.
report.
No action on a report.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Mr. Duffy, did you have a comment on a non-action item?
I do, and really it's a suggestion to assist with this. The OPSC has a document that's a 5004 document, and there's a check the box. Do you run a labor compliance program, yes or no? The suggestion to Ms. Silverman would be to recontact those districts that checked yes to determine, one, if they actually are running a program or if they thought they had to check yes there. The other would be that if they would accept Proposition 1D funds that do not carry with them labor compliance funds to pay for the program. In essence, a district that would accept 1D dollars, although they are running a labor compliance program and wouldn't be compensated for that, and finding out whether or not that would be acceptable to them. The first comment was to basically review whether or not districts really properly check the boxes there. And we suggest that, Lisa, because of 2 conversations with people that work with a lot of school districts, one last week and one just today, that basically said that these kinds of issues may be getting in the way. So just trying to help. That would allow you to do one of 2 things, either put 47 and 55 funds on the street or more 1D dollars on the street. And that's my only comment, and thank you.
I think your point's well taken. That's really why I wanted to have this item, because I think staff did, I just don't think that the board and everyone had a complete understanding of how the list was developed, and it struck me as something really important, particularly when there's three of us that are new, although Senator Huff's not here today, but that we really all had a shared understanding of it, so we can make adjustments if we want to. So, thank you. All right, anything else on that? Okay, moving to tab 11. What? Now tab 11, yeah. Mr. Harvey, tab 11. Masha Lutzik, presenting this item.
Good afternoon. This is on tab 11 for those of you that have the tab binder in page 157, stamp page 157. Here's a discussion item with the goal to provide options for the board for application of the annual grant adjustment that was adopted at the January meeting. We've heard a lot of concerns about the action in January and both in February, so we went back and also in this period of trying to resolve this issue, determined that we will not be bringing any funding applications forward to the board for approval this month, but we will bring applications forward hopefully in the future months, and we will make sure that we present them in appropriate groups to delineate between January projects, February projects, and what would have been March projects, so we do not penalize districts. So just want to make that little note before I go into the discussion. The discussion on the CCI adjustment, which is the construction cost index, I believe needs a little bit of background, so I'll just quickly go through that. The majority of the funding provided by the board for new construction and modernization is based on the per pupil grant, and the law requires us to annually adjust that for changes in the construction cost index for Class B construction. And then we have further regulations that ask the board to adopt that index each January. We are in uncharted territory for a couple of reasons. First, the index adjustment since 1999, which has always been positive. And it's been past practice for us, since the applications don't immediately go to the board once they arrive to our office, that applications presented late in the calendar year would be presented to the State Allocation Board in January or February of the following calendar year, and having the benefit of the positive adjustments. When the adjustment is negative, there's of course a concern about the processing dates, and could have a project been presented earlier, as well as projects not receiving advance notice on the negative adjustment. And like I said already, this is the first time that the adjustment is negative. The second challenge on the issue, and we believe it's the most important one, is the uncertain status of the approvals that we have been making. In the past, there were a couple of programs, for example, modernization program, very popular program, quickly got oversubscribed, and in prior bonds, we quickly exhausted bond authority and moved to what we call an unfunded list. This is a provision in regulations, not in statute, and it directs the board to establish an information list of projects when funds are not available. Again, just to recite past history, once funds become available, such as with a new bond sale, we present the applications to the board for an actual apportionment, and they again receive a benefit of the CCI changes, always positive in the past, and they receive the apportionment at the level of the current grant amounts. And that is consistent with what we believe the intent of the program was, is to review applications for projects that are ready to be built and provide them with a grant level that is based on the measure of inflation at that point, the best one that we have available. Again, we are in uncharted territory here, because our unfunded approvals do not, currently that we're making, are being provided to districts partly to allow them to move forward, even when they have a paper approval from the state, to move forward and obtain maybe local financing and move forward with the projects. Yet, we may not be able to recognize them as actual apportionments under the current regulations. So we believe that, and respecting all the concerns that were brought in the prior meetings, that we believe that the main issue is the status of these approvals that we're making. And again, to remind you, we've also, back last year when we did provide, initiate unfunded approvals, did make a delineation that these are different than the unfunded approvals than the board have done in the past. So with that said, we are focusing this item discussion on that issue. We're presenting two options. The first one, it's spelled out on stamped page 159 on the bottom, and that is basically an option to apply the CCI adjustment to unfunded approvals following the adoption of the index adjustment. And we think there is flexibility in the regulations to do this. The board is, the regulations tell the board to adopt the index in January, and the adjustments to the grants must be annual, but we think that there's flexibility there to determine that the adjustments to the actual approvals can happen the following month. We're still making an annual adjustment, but we are addressing the issue of giving districts advance notice. So this recommendation would basically state that any unfunded approvals presented in April, those ones that we were planning to present in April, would be receiving the new 2010 grant levels based on the index adjustment of minus 6.74%. We are spelling out the actions that would be needed, and this is mostly for our benefit and those of stakeholders to know clearly what our actions would be after this. And simply put, it would mean that we would freeze all the unfunded approvals at the level that they are approved at the time of unfunded approval. This is something that we feel could be established as policy and then also formulated into regulations that we could bring forward to you and hopefully maybe even be able to move them on as emergency regulations to the Office of Administrative Law after we do that research. Careful glances here. But we believe it would be best because we're really potentially dealing with a type of approval that we have not done before. It's neither an apportionment nor unfunded approval. By freezing, though, the 2009 projects, we would also, to be consistent, be freezing any 2010 unfunded approvals with 2010 adjustments at their level. The con to that for those school districts is that if there is a positive CCI change next year, and if for some reason there's still not an apportionment provided, those districts would not be able to get the benefit of any positive increases later. So folks, projects being frozen on the unfunded list works both ways and has pros and cons if you think about adjustments being positive and negative. But again, the goal for us is to stay consistent and have expectations written out so folks can know what will happen to their projects. And then option 2 is a counter option to that, which would be to, with that option, we would not need any regulatory change. We would be deeming the unfunded approvals provided by the board as true unfunded approvals, and the CCI adjustments for those projects would happen at the time of apportionment. So, for example, any projects that received an unfunded approval in 2009, let's say in August 2009, presented for an actual apportionment, let's say in June 2010, would receive the lower allocation based on the new CCI. Either way, we would still be meeting the requirements on the law to adopt an index and apply it annually to projects. We just have to figure out which projects, unfunded approvals or apportionments. And with that, I'd be able to answer any questions on this issue.
Are there any questions? Assembly,
I want to make sure I'm interpreting a phrase you used accurately. You said an unfunded list is when funds are not available. We've got bonds, so there are funds theoretically available, but we can't get to them because of the market. So can we legally have an unfunded list if the definition of that list is the funds are not available?
Please allow me correction. I'll just quote directly from the regulation so we're clear. The regulation, it's, for those that are interested, 1859.95, and we're also providing it in here in your item 2, is specifically reads, when the board has no funds to apportion, the board will continue to accept and process applications, et cetera, and for purposes of developing an unfunded list. An unfunded list is further defined as an information list of projects. So it's when the board has no funds to apportion.
That makes me feel a little bit better. I wouldn't want us to create something that we really shouldn't be creating if the definition is universally held that an unfunded list means funds are not available. Thank you for that clarification. Let me also ask, there's another word in your report on page 157 where it talks about this annual adjustment. I'm looking under the authority, the third paragraph, and the phrase is, as set forth in the statewide cost index. Is CCI statewide, or is it broader than that? How are we using the definition statewide?
There are various entities that develop cost indices. So the one that we've used historically in the SFP is Marshall and Swift, and the CCI is just a term that refers to multiple indices, construction cost index, and the law, though, specifically directs us to use a statewide Class B, and Class B is defined as steel and concrete and excludes wood frames, so it's just a specific, zooms in on specific types of construction.
I just wanted to seek clarity because I know one of our choices was to use the 8 cities that in California. That clearly is a statewide. That's California cities. I didn't know if the one we selected went more regionally, that is, out of the state.
We did 8 cities.
We did 8 cities in January 2010, but in the past, in the majority of the years during the SFP, there was the 10 western states selection, which also covers California, but not exclusive to California.
So again, I feel better. We chose what we did in our January action as the 8 cities in California. That would indeed be statewide. I kind of like option 1. I'll put myself out there on that only because of your very first bullet under the pro on your page 160, where it talks about how you're kind of freezing these things, protecting these things. But anyway, I like number 1 for the reasons you stated.
Senator Lowenthal?
I'm not sure I understand all the issues, and when I went through the recommendations, I didn't quite understand everything, so I'm just going to state what I'd like to see, and you tell me. I think it's mostly in option 1. Basically, that we use the 2009 CCI for all projects that have been added to the unfunded list to date. So we're going to use the 2009, so they're not going to be subject to the change. Beginning in April, we're going to apply the 2010 CCI, I think, to all of the new 2010 unfunded. What I don't understand is then where do we go? In 2011, the board is going to decide in January the flexibility that we're going to be needing. We're going to go through another CCI, right, adjustment. The question is, do we have the flex, if there are dramatic changes, can we say that we're locking in through regulation, I thought? Could we not lock that in and just give us the flexibility in 2011 to make another decision based upon if we have rapid inflation, for example, that takes place? We have now funded these at a lower level in 2010. In January of 2011, let's say we have dramatic inflation, which I'm not saying we will, hopefully we won't. Shouldn't we have the flexibility then to set where that CCI is for all those coming in 2011? Because we're really going to, all those that have, if they've still not been approved, apportioned yet, all those that are in that we're apportioning now, could we, just as could we look those over again in 2011 as well, since we haven't funded? Do we have that ability? That's the issue that I'm raising. Could we have that flexibility?
Well, there's one thing I learned in all of this discussion about what the effect of all of our actions are, is that we can always redo our regulations. That one I understand for sure. That we can
because I just want to make sure if we go that we have that flexibility, that all those that we're locking in at a drop if we now find that we still haven't apportioned by 2011, and costs are way up, that we have not locked that in. That would scare me.
There's also the AB 127 adjustment that the board has the discretion to make as well. That's the other 6%. There's the other one, another one, so that you also have, we will also have that flexibility to address.
So you're saying we will have all this flex, no matter what we do by, we will have that flexibility in 2011 to look at all those that we've given in 2010.
Senator, it's based on your motion, since it's a policy consideration, as OPSC said, is suggesting an option 1 to lock in the 2010 to the CCI apportionment there. It is a policy decision, so therefore, if the board wishes to unlock or not lock, that is a policy decision that either they can make as a motion tonight or have staff go back, review, and propose in regulation.
Because I just want to have as much flexibility in 2011 as possible, really.
I
when
also,
we come to that.
I appreciate that we want to maintain flexibility. At the same time, part of, as I was working a little bit with the staff on this item, I wanted to also provide some kind of certainty to the list as well, not to just leave it in flux. And I think this board's been really clear that we're very sympathetic on all of these issues, and obviously
Right.
we would make, I think we would, if there was superinflation or there was extreme costs of construction, they know they can come back to us. But at the same time, I don't want anyone to be fooled into thinking that that it's just going to keep constantly changing. We would have under option 1 the flexibility to make adjustments in January 2011
To those that are already we've
by
apportioned.
changing our regulations.
We can,
Oh, those we've already apportioned?
well, not apportion, that
Those are on
they're
unfunded.
unfunded approval.
If we've
you know.
apportioned, if anyone gets
No, if they're
apportioned.
apportioned, no. I'm just talking about all those that
knock on
come
wood,
in.
maybe the treasurer will have really good sales.
And then we won't
now and
have all
fall,
these
and we'll be
unfunded.
done with this.
We won't have all these unfunded. But if we
Right.
do, I just want to say that I want that flexibility to understand in 2000, just like we're doing now about all those that came in now. And so we're saying if you were on the list up until now, you get the 2009, which was the higher number. I'm just saying if by any chance we need to increase that, I just want to make sure that we have that flexibility to do that.
You have the flexibility to change the regulations, and also you have the AB 127.
I also would like to think.
Can I
that-
clarify, Madam Chair, with OPSC, are regulations currently set, because I thought you said we would need regulations to set that with that freeze and setting it. So are there regulations in place now, or those are the regulations you're proposing in option 1 to create?
Option 1 would need clarifying regulations
so we need to
to
create
reflect
the
the board's
regulations.
policy.
Just to make clear that our intent is to to move those January and February into the 2009 pot.
But the
Also,
regulations
the
would
one
be
about
created.
2000 The 2010, that starting next year, we're just, that, we're going to make regulations now that freeze those in at 2010 level.
Yep, that is the OPSC recommendation, Senator.
That is, but if I didn't really want us to freeze, if I just wanted us to say until 2011, if there's still not a portion, that we would then look at that CCI in 2011 to make a determination. What would I need to do? Make a substitute motion?
You would have to make a modified option 1 or make an option 3, make it your own.
Got it. And the only other point, and I would like to do that because we are reducing and I really want, the other point is, I'm not sure, there are other options, not so much for this year, but to really look at maybe the implementation committee. We now use, following up on what Scott Harvey mentioned before about what is statewide, what is regional, what basis. We're using the 8 cities in the, there are other options that we could be doing. For example, we could be, I think, that I'm not sure what the lease sailor one, I've seen that in print, but that, should we be sending to the implementation committee just for them to consider for 2011 what if they want to make some changes in that and get back to us? I'm just not aware of what the differences are, all the differences between these different models. And I'd like to hear something come back in the future, not to use now, but to use in the future, too.
Right. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think they've had the discussion in the past there, but it's certainly, it's always worth having a discussion
Okay.
to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Okay.
Senator Hancock?
But I still think that what I'm saying is all those, I think the differences between what I'd like to see in number one is the fact that we're not going to create regulations now that all of these come 2011 are locked in. What I would like to see is that we do this through 2000, through 2010, and if we make regulation, or when we go through the same CCI in 2011, that we be given the flexibility to, since they have not apportioned, to make those changes. Because what you're saying is we would have to adopt regulations today and then change those regulations in January of 2011 if we go this way. I'd rather give us the flexibility now to make those changes in 2011. That's just what I would like to do.
Senator Hancock?
I agree with a lot of the import of what Senator Lowenthal said. I was going to try to make a motion out of it. Because I have to say, as I looked into the business of what index we use, I think that we had a little catch-22 happening here, because as it turns out, the 8 cities index doesn't factor in prevailing wage, which in fact law requires districts to use. And that could lead to a reduction that just sort of lowers their whole grant. And it seems to me that we would want to direct the implementation committee to look at all the indexes that are out there so we get an accurate reflection of what we really are requiring our districts to do. So if I could try this, I would move option 1, adding to it that we ask the Staff and Implementation Committee to review all the available indexes for 2011 to find what most accurately reflects the conditions under which our districts will be building their schools, and to also make clear that what we're doing today will be subject to 127 grant adjustments should districts find out that the 2009 CCI, which will be about 6.5% less money.
No, see, the 2009 is higher.
2010.
Right.
Those districts find that they can't complete their construction under that formula. But I think, as the chair pointed out, we do have AB 127 grant adjustments available to us to make. And we just want to clarify that that is definitely
Before
part
the
of what we're
motion
doing.
is moved, Senator Hancock, what you're asking is actually a little bit different than what Senator Lowenthal was wanting. Option 1 does not have the flexibility, nor does it clarify what is included for the 09. Is it included to February, or does it include all the March, which are not on the list here, but which OPSC has?
Oh, okay, my assumption was that we were going to keep the 2009 CCI for projects that got unfunded approval in 2009 or in January, February, and March of 2010, when those funds become available.
And that in 2010, from April on, we would use the new CC&I.
Right, with the opportunity.
But I'm
to-
just concerned about what happens in 2011.
with the flexibility of possible 127 adjustments, and that for 2011, we're going to look at all the different indexes.
Just to be clear, there aren't any March projects. Is there a March list somewhere? We have no items on our agenda for March approval. So we had January items and we had February items. We won't have any more items again until April.
And it's kind of a policy discussion, if the SAB wishes, OPSC has kept tabs of what would have been on the
Okay,
March agenda.
Let me just be really, really clear about my position on this. This would-haves and could-haves is what's making this really difficult to manage. It's like, that was the whole conversation in January. Well, if we would have had a meeting in December, that's why when we did this agenda, it was why I felt very strongly to have this discussion about CCI and have this discussion about the list, was to have no projects on this, so that we were clear on a going forward basis.
So I'll take March out.
Yeah, that would
January
be
and
really helpful.
February, okay.
And just so you know, the
Yeah.
February, remember Ms. Moore's motion in February, we took all the February projects off, both those there were some January ones and some February ones, so we will have to vote on those again, because they've never been approved by us in April, but we'll do those at the 2009 level, and then the new project, if we add new ones in April, we may not, because we have apportionments to do, and I think that's our priority, to put the cash out. But at that time, then those would be at the 2010 level. Does that make sense?
Can I just clarify? So you're saying the Januaries were already approved, but it's January, they'd remain status quo. The February, we didn't take an action on it, but it's a known list. So we are including the January
Yeah.
and the February known list at the 2009 CCI and all projects in 2009 prior as well.
Right.
And then,
There'll be a new list in April. I think I don't know your staff work, if you have time, if the apportionment people are the same ones as the unfunded list people, can they do both? Or if we focus on apportionments, will we not have anything added to unfunded?
It would be easier for us to do the apportionments depending on, if the board chooses option one, we don't have to recalculate those unfunded approvals. We could bring them as a list to the board, so that we could accommodate that. It would be a little bit more challenging, since we have to readdress January and February people to do to address unfunded approvals. So maybe we can bring the old ones for correction to you and bring truly new ones. We're planning to bring more unfunded approvals, new ones in April, but with this move, we may not be able to do that. Our cutoff deadlines are severely
we're
marked.
off of option one, though. The board has moved beyond option one, and because it is.
I don't mean to speak for her, but I think she
Sure.
means option one in terms of splitting the list, not in terms, option two is just doing it at the time of apportionment. We're not talking about regulations, right? Are you just talking about January and February dates, I believe?
Okay, let's
So
back up a little bit.
restate it, because I think you guys are talking across each other.
Why don't we restate the motion?
Right. What
And
is the
then,
motion?
and then staff can say how that impacts, I think. Because I'm understanding the motion to be very different than option one.
I am too, and I'm getting really concerned about this discussion, because I think that we almost had consensus around option one, and that we just needed to clarify that at any given time, the way this is currently written, we always have the opportunity to review it in January. We're always going to have the opportunity to review it in January, and at that time, we can always open the CCI or not open the CCI. I think the issue is, for us tonight, started out to be the difference between at apportionment or on the list. And so if we move to option one and we take option two completely off, we don't want to do option two, and we clarify it so that we basically are just saying, that basically what it comes down to is we just want to let those guys who were like floating around out there that we know are on a list now have what we intended for them to have back then. And that maybe it was an unanticipated consequence for the way it came out, that those people that are like January and February approvals didn't get the 2009, because we didn't want to harm the people who were already in line and who had already been there. Now we've moved so far away from that I'm afraid that our motion is going to be clouded up for those people by all of the things that we may, should, might do in the future that we have the right to do anyway. So if we do it, I say at least do it in two motions. Like let's do the motion that basically says that we are going to do option one, and that we're going to let, like, up to whatever you decide about March. Okay, so it's January and February, and we're not changing any of the regs that say we have to make an annual adjustment. We have to make an annual adjustment. We have to. Next January, we have to make an annual adjustment. And the precedent that we're setting is that and that the regs say, evidently, is that up to 1 month after that, like if we make the annual adjustment in December, up to 1 month after that in January, we can put all those guys in whatever is the better funding formula that we have decided upon for them. And it's only the people who are apportioned, who actually get their money, that can't be changed. And I suppose, given the fact that this board seems to be able to change anything they want to change, they probably could change that too if we all got together on that. Is that a motion? Yeah, okay, yes, that's a motion, so. Back to.
I'm sorry, but.
I know, it's confusing.
But it is confusing because option one says, apply the CCI adjustment to SFP unfunded approvals following the adoption of the annual grant adjustments by the State Allocation Board. Okay, the state, I think they wanted clarity, but the State Allocation Board did adjust in January the CCI down 6.474%, correct? So the next statement says, projects presented for unfunded approval after March 24th will receive grants based on the negative CCI for 2010. Okay, so we have the January projects that are not apportioned after March, but we have the February projects that will be apportioned after March that are not included, and I heard the board say they want to include January and February. That's why I'm saying that option one didn't seem to do what the board
I think when you look at the 4 bullet points below, the steps to implement the action, it would leave the January 27th in place. We would recalculate the February ones and present those revised at the April 28th with the old rate. Direct staff to use the SAP grants of 2010 for the new unfunded approvals. The only bullet point, this 4th bullet point, direct staff to prepare emergency regs, is off the table.
And the only other thing is to clarify, is just delete that when apportioned, these projects will retain the 2010 level of funding and not be subject to further any adjustments.
Right, good point.
Take that off, and then just add in that you're directing me to go to implementation committee to have an indices discussion.
Right.
Okay. And Ms. Kaplan, that's the motion.
That's the clarified motion.
With the clarifying.
Right. Okay, I'll do it. I think the motion is to apply the CCI adjustment to SFP unfunded approvals following adoption of the annual grant adjustments by the State Allocation Board. Projects presented for unfunded approval after March 24th, 2010 will receive grants based on a negative 6.74% CCI for 2010. The actions needed are declared the January 27th SAB unfunded approvals to be valid and effective as presented at the January 27th meeting. Direct staff to recalculate unfunded approvals presented at the February 24th, 2010 meeting with 2009 grant levels. Present the revised project approvals to the SAB at the April 28th, 2010 meeting. Direct staff to use the SFP grants at the 2010 levels for any new unfunded approvals beginning with April 2010, and direct the implementation committee to consider the various index options that are out there.
Correct.
All right, that was the motion. Can we have a roll call? Oh, wait, I forgot to ask for public comment. We had
Madam Chair, if I could, and we also, there was talk about clarifying that AB 127 adjustments are still available. We're not doing any more CCI calculations, but those adjustments that people get aren't. We don't need it because it's understood it's there.
We just know it. Okay. Mr. Duffy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Tom Duffy, for cash. I just wanted to point out that that bottom bullet, Madam Chair, that you read about the, or the bottom bullet that's there, dealing with emergency regulations. Item 21 that you removed from the agenda, there's an implication for that, and I just wanted to point that out. It's noted above. And so not troubling with this motion at all. Just wanted to indicate to you that we had submitted a letter on the CCI question, and we talked about the lease sailor index reflecting what Senator Hancock was talking about earlier, and that is reflecting labor cost at the prevailing wage level, which we think is important. And we don't want to undo what you've done. You've done some wonderful things, and it's been complicated. But just for the record and on the side of fairness, the 6% increase that, again, Senator Hancock just mentioned was not applied in 2009, and it has not been applied in 2010. And the negative 6.74 would have a different effect had the 6% been applied last year in 2009. So just as we move forward with this, and this is I think the executive officer said, this sort of uncharted waters here. As we move forward, if we just keep that before us, and if we can get to that, remembering that it was for 2009 and that there's been a lot of work and study that was done by OPSC on that, and I think it's reflective of an increase on the overall, but also to remember 2010. And the effect of 2010 review may be somewhat on the negative, but at least we believe that it should be done. So again, thank you. I appreciate the difficult task you've had in reviewing all this information.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other comment? Can you call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Senator Hancock? Aye. Assemblymember Fuller? Aye. Assemblymember Torlakson? Aye. Scott Harvey? Aye. Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Lynn Green?
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant?
Aye.
It carries.
Thank you.
You want to keep it open? We may have Assemblymember Brownlee arriving.
Yeah, well, all the items are kept open for now. Although I guess now we'll give her time to catch her breath and we can go back and, yeah. Yeah, we'll leave it. Before we move on to tab 12, I wanted to go ahead and do our presentation. Were you going to do that, Lisa, or was I doing that? So we have, the State Allocation Board has a resolution for our former executive.
Yes, we would like to formally present Mr. Rob Cook a resolution for his service on the State Allocation Board. Rob has spent 2.5 years in the program, and with that, brought numerous policy issues for discussion, also brought a lot of process efficiencies. So on behalf of the State Allocation Board, we'd like to thank you for your dedicated service.
Okay, item 12. Washa?
Okay, this item is presented to address, again, a concern at the February board about the corresponding adjustment for construction cost index to the developer fees. And there are a couple of differences here that need to be pointed out. One is this adjustment does not impact our state funding piece of the projects. Rather, it is an adjustment that impacts the developer fees that are that often compile the matching share, local matching share for school construction projects for the school district. In January, and the second major difference with the CCI is that statute that governs this adjustment clearly calls for changes for increases only and inflationary changes, rather than just adjustments up or down, as was the case with the previous item. So the index that the board selected in January did not show an inflation. It was a 1 cent decrease, and therefore, by keeping the developer fee levels unchanged, the board acted appropriately, and our recommendation is to confirm the development fee rate that was maintained at the 2008 level as the final board decision.
Are there any questions? Staff?
Well, I guess, I was the member that I think raised this last time, and I just, and I still feel this way, that we, in terms of, reducing the index for the schools and school people, and then increasing, making it more advantageous, even though it's very slight. For the builders, just doesn't seem right to me. But if there has been, it sounds like there's been 3 different opinions, with our own attorneys opining twice, and then the AG. Was the AG?
The AG's here if you want to hear from him.
Yes, I would like to hear from him.
I should say it's a Deputy Attorney General. Attorney General Brown's not here.
And this was a request by the board for the AG to opine on this?
Well, I think we talked about having a lot of legal people look at it, so we had them. I had our counsel look at it. DGS counsel looked at it, and on this one they agreed. So, Mr. Patton.
That sound better? Yeah, I was in agreement with DGS Legal. This I saw as a fairly simple question on the developer fee action. What I looked at was that there were a couple of there were 2 options presented in terms of indexes. 6 members voted relying on the Marshall and Swift index, which showed a 1 cent drop. And my reading of Government Code Section 65995 was that it only provided for adjustments upward, unlike other statutes that discuss making changes, like Ed Code 1707210B, which allows a change, and you've had adjustments, as you just saw, downward. This one on the developer fee only talks in terms of increases and inflation. My conclusion was, since the index that was relied on showed a 1 cent decrease, but there's no provision in this section for decreasing fees, that the board's action to leave the fees where they were was consistent with the statutory mandate, and therefore a legitimate and final determination. In fact, I was asked, should that be subject to reconsideration, and I said, no, I don't see where there's a basis to reopen that.
Well, so there's kind of 2 issues. 1, your interpretation of the statute, and 2, you're weighing in on the way we deliberated, and therefore to reverse a decision, in your opinion, would not be appropriate. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, as to the interpretation, there had been a contrary conclusion reached by DGS Legal that they had concluded that under this Government Code 65995 that an adjustment downward could be made, and I did not agree with that. I read it as very clearly only providing for increases according to the adjustment for inflation set forth in the statewide index. So I didn't see any room in the statute. To me, it was not a difficult conclusion that it only allows for ratcheting up. It's a ratchet system. And that then my further conclusion was that a majority relied on a legitimate statewide index, found that there was no inflation indicated in that index, decided then to leave it at its level, and I concluded that was...
Do you mind if I just have a follow-up question?
Yeah, no.
I guess, I mean, at this point, I think leaving the decision the way it is and accepting your interpretation is okay with me. But I guess I'm raising some issues on, just for my own inquiry, really. Because one is, if we have statute and regulations that we're following here, I mean, for me, it doesn't really make sense that the school districts kind of take the hit, but the developer doesn't have to share in that. And I know that this is, we're in unusual times because normally things would increase versus, having a reduction. I guess the question is, does the board, do we have the ability, if we wanted to, and I'm not necessarily proposing that, but if we wanted to change that, in other words, you're interpreting it the way, you've made a legal interpretation of what the statute says. If we want to change the statute, is that within our ability to do so?
If you want to change the statute?
Correct. Understanding that there were three opinions on this. Two opinions, there was two opinions, that your opinion and the other attorney that was here, that it was the same, and then the other attorney here on the dais at one point had a differing opinion. So there's been, basically three opinions. So I know you're looking at me like, I can barely speak English, but what my question is, I understand it's an interpretation, and I could probably go out and find somebody else to make a different interpretation. So if we wanted to make our intentions clear, and I interpret it differently than you, do I have the opportunity to at least present to the board to make a change so that it reflects what our intention and desire was if we happen to disagree? Oh, there's that look again.
Let me answer just from what I know, Assemblywoman Brownlee. This is set up in statute. The board has authority to interpret regulations that is within their power as a state allocation board. It is not within the power of the state allocation board to subvert or ignore statute. So if we need clarification on what we want.
So if we have different legal opinions on what the statute says, then who gets to be the person that decides to clarify that one way or the other?
If there are two objective legal opinions, it's within the board's authority, within the intent of the background of looking at the legislation to reasonably interpret what the meaning of the statute is.
Okay. And that's the answer I'm looking for. I'm not necessarily saying here that I want to, have a revolution or anything. I just wanted to then answer a clarification, of that. The second question that I have is, you also are opining on the fact that because we had a discussion that was a 6-to-1 vote, that we had concluded our business and it would not be appropriate to bring it back. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So this is my question. My question is, I thought that at our last meeting, since we don't have any rules, that we decided that we were going to agree for the time being to Robert's Rules of Order. I thought that we had made that agreement. Is that correct? Okay. So, I'm not an expert in Robert's Rules of Order, and perhaps you are, and that's your opinion is based on Robert's Rules. Is that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So my just from my experience as a school board member for 12 years, I thought in Robert's Rules, if you were on the winning side of a vote, you could bring it back to the board, for reconsideration. That's what I thought Robert's Rules said. I could be wrong. I don't know.
My opinion didn't have anything to do with Robert's Rules. My opinion was based on the California Supreme Court decision in HEAP and a long line of cases that say, unless an administrative agency is given a process and the statutory authority to reopen and redecide matters, it doesn't have, Ms. Boren-Irwin suggested this in February at the meeting. She opined that the board does not have the power to reconsider its final decisions, and that is what HEAP says. Now, it gets a little more detailed than that, but in general, decisions on issues and cases, a funding decision for a district, once it's made final, and unless it suffers from a legal defect, it's final. And it works both ways, so that you can't reopen it to take the money back away from the district and say, oh, we changed our mind, and you can't reopen it to decide, oh, we want to give you more money. And it's all premised on obtaining some finality in administrative decisions. There is an exception when a board, an administrative agency, does something that is beyond their jurisdiction to do. If they've committed a legal error in making a decision, then they do have the power to recognize that error and to say, hey, we need to fix that, and they can. And it's really not a reconsideration because they're not redeciding something that they decided correctly in the first place. That's why I say it's not a reconsideration. What they're doing is they're fixing an erroneous decision that a court would have the authority to intervene in an action in mandamus to fix. So that's the distinction. That's what the California Supreme Court has said. My opinion had nothing to do with Robert's Rules of Order.
And I do want to present a complete picture. While I agree with Mr. Patton, there are specifically, just to state an AG opinion that was written in 1999 that looked into this authority. It states, in the absence of specific authority, an administrative agency such as the State Allocation Board, as a general rule, has no power to grant a rehearing or otherwise reconsider a previous final decision. However, in 3 exceptions or narrow cases, the first 2 he mentioned, if there's specific legislative authorization that grants the ability of the State Allocation Board to review its decisions. 2, if it exceeded its authority in law, as you made a decision, you couldn't legally make a decision. You have the ability to go back because that decision is null and void. And 3, it says the rule would not apply where the agency's decision was made without sufficient evidence. Now, there is not enough case law to specifically explain without sufficient evidence or whatever that's defined, but those are the 3 areas where the board has the ability to reconsider its decision.
So if the board collectively decided that for whatever reason they made a decision and upon reflection felt as though they did not exercise their best judgment, there's no recourse, is what you're telling me. Okay, thank you.
One thing I'd like to add, a distinction, Assemblymember Brownlee, needs to be made between procedure and legality. What WAG Patton is basing his decision on is what the board can legally do. What Robert's Rules controls is the procedure and process by which we do it. Unfortunately, the legal method or legal decision supersedes Robert's Rules of Order. The other point I'd like to make to an earlier point about how those kinds of distinctions between positions, whether it's Deputy Attorney General Patton's, Ms. Boron's, or my opinions are ultimately decided. The ultimate arbiter of those kinds of difference in legal decision or legal opinions would be the courts, and that's where a final decision would be made.
Okay, any more questions on that? So then we'll move on to item 13. Juan Morales.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next on the agenda is tab 13.
Just to clarify, did the board accept the report so that we have it clearly as it is an action item?
No.
Yeah, yes, we did. There's nothing pending to vote on.
Well, based on Deputy Attorney General Patton's decision, it's not necessary to confirm it. You have a final decision, so you can move on, Madam Chair.
Right, unless someone wants to suggest a change in statute, which is what I think was what Assemblymember Brownlee was getting at. And if I may just say, I think there has been a good bit of confusion about what's reg, what's legislation, what's one thing and another. So I appreciate the clarification so that board members know what their choices are.
Okay, item 13.
The next item deals with funds remaining in the energy efficiency program and the possibility of transferring those funds to be used for a high-performance incentive grant. Proposition 47 set aside $20 million, and Proposition 55 set aside an additional $20 million for a total of $40 million in the energy efficiency program. The energy efficiency funds were exhausted back in 2006, and since then, we've had several projects that have reduced the costs incurred, resulting in the return of about $800,000 to the program. Staff looked at the corresponding statutes and concluded that there is no statutory authority to transfer the available funds to the high-performance incentive grants. However, the board does have the ability to declare that the funds are no longer needed, and if they do so, then the funds will go back to the original pot of money they came from, namely new construction modernization. So what staff is proposing is that in order for the board to be able to make that finding, to open up, notify school districts that the funds are available for a period of a year to see if districts come in and access these additional funds. If so, the funds are available, they will be used for those purposes, and if not, come back within a year to update the board on the status of the funds and with the possibility of the board making a finding that the funds are no longer needed. So staff is recommending that the OPSC notify districts that the funds are available, have that availability for a year, and come back and report to the board if the funds are not used within that year.
Second.
Can you call the roll? I should ask, is there any public comment on this item?
Senator Lowenthal. Senator Hancock. Assemblymember Fuller. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Torlakson. Scott Harvey. Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green.
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant. Carries.
Okay, item number 14.
The purpose of this report is to request the approval to reserve the funds for administrative costs for the program for 2009-2010. Specifically, there's a list of descriptions of the various program costs that we administer. For Proposition 1D, there's a large apportionment allocated specifically for administrative costs for the Office of Public School Construction, the State Controller's Office for the fiscal oversight and processing of their funds, for districts, California School Finance Authority for the financial soundness test for charter schools, the Department of Education costs with the site and educational plan reviews. So the amount allocated for that particular program is $16.865 million. In addition, there's also additional administrative costs that also come out of the various pots of money. Specifically for Proposition 55, there is a $549,000 charge or encumbrance for the school facilities finance authority soundness tests, and that will be specifically for the Bond Act of 2004. There's also other allocations specifically for the State Relocatable Classroom Fund of $264,000, State School Deferred Maintenance Cost for $142,000, general fund cost associated with processing emergency repair program. Our recommendations, in accordance with the approval of the 2009-2010 governor's budget, the listed administrative costs have been authorized and are provided below. We're requesting authorization to set aside $16.86 million specifically for the state school facility program for Proposition 1D. Again, let me restate that, $16,865,463 to cover the cost I explained earlier. Also provide authorization for $549,000 to the 2004 State School Facilities Funds for charges for the California School Finance Authority services. Authorize $264,000 for the State Relocatable Classroom Fund, and authorize $142,000 for the School Deferred Maintenance Fund, and authorize $320,000 for the General Fund.
Are there any questions on this item? Senator Lowenthal?
I do believe, is the SAB statutory authority to determine the overall. I think it's the amounts that the board determines that are necessary for the Department of General Services. And while I really appreciate this one-year breakdown, I can't make any sense out of it. I needed over a number of years to see whether there have been increases or decreases in more. So I have a number of suggestions. I don't have to go through them all. But I would really like to see something that lays it out over a 3 or 5 year period, so I can see where there are increases, where there are not, where there's some explanation that show why there has been an increase of what's been, because I have tried to go back and look, and there are tremendous changes over the last couple, but I'm not provided that information to understand why we're doing that and not. I'm just given a number for this year as though, and I find that very, very difficult, and not that I'm disagreeing with it. There's not one thing in there that I'm saying may or may not be appropriate, but I have not the slightest idea where this comes from. And to me, it's not appropriate.
Mr. Harvey?
Senator, again, I'm going to acknowledge you're a person of good faith on these questions, but I'm going to also suggest that the governor and the Department of Finance put together the Department of General Services budget on an annual basis.
Shall I read to you Education Code 17070.65, from any monies in any of the funds established pursuant to Section 17070.40 as appropriate and approved by this purpose in the Annual Budget Act, the Board, shall make available to the Director of General Services the amounts that the Board determines necessary for the Department of General Services to provide the assistance pursuant to this chapter.
I respectfully say that the form for this is the annual budget. If you want a discussion about what we do on an annual basis, I think the Budget Subcommittee is the appropriate place to do that, because this is an administrative action that acknowledges what the governor
We just don't know.
and finance have done. It's approved annually as part of the state's budget. So I'm acknowledging your right to see whatever you want. We're trying to be transparent. We should be transparent. But the form for putting our budget together is part of the executive and legislative process. It's not SAB's per se.
And so you're saying I cannot see that over time, the same form?
I didn't say that.
What?
You can see whatever you'd like to be comfortable with how adjustments are being made, what the adjustments may be used for. What I'm saying is that the governor and the Department of Finance put together the Department of General Services budget. OPSC is a division within that department. The Director of General Services is charged with administering his divisions. OPSC is one of them. So we're very willing to show you whatever you want to get a sense of how the legislature and the governor have put our budget together, but I'm just saying those questions, I think, are part of the budget discussions and not here.
So when I'm authorizing this, all I'm asking for is you're asking me 5 recommendations to authorize funding. I do not know where those numbers came from, whether how they've changed over time. All I'm asking to see is, you're asking us to take action, and I don't feel I have the information to take that action.
Senator Hancock, I'm sorry. Is it time? Ms. Assemblywoman Fuller.
Since I'm trying to leave in a few minutes, I'll go ahead. I think, first of all, we need to clarify the purpose of the report. If it is within our purview as a board to make an approval of this, then obviously we need the figures that we are requesting. If it is not within our purview to make an approval of this report, and it is somebody else's, the governor's or whoever else, then I suspect the motion should be that we ask for additional information, to clarify, but it doesn't necessarily pertain to this motion. I'm a little confused since of the discussion, which it is, because it says to request approval. Is that approval ours? And if it is, then generally, even in school budgets, whenever a budget is laid out, the percent change from one year item to the next is included in the budget, so that the approving body, it doesn't have to be 3 years, but generally the percent change from last year's budget to this year is listed. So, A, are we actually taking some motion that approves this? And if so, then I think we might need the percentage change information. Or B, is it a part of the governor's budget and is just suggested for our knowledge, so that we know?
I believe we are statutorily required to approve the budget. Correct?
Silverman?
I mean, typically, when we presented this item, it's just been a ministerial act. Again, it's just.
Doesn't the statute indicate that the board is required to approve the budget?
The budget has been set in the Budget Act, and so, I mean, we can present you detailed information to give you a cost breakdown from year to year.
Not answering my question. I believe that the board is statutorily required to approve the budget. Is that correct or not correct?
The statutory authority says that the board is approving program funds for DGS to administer the program.
No, it says the amount DGS to provide assistance to pursuant to this chapter. I mean, as I read it, it says the board shall make available to the DGS the amount the board determines necessary for DGS to provide assistance pursuant to this chapter. So I think there may be confusion about the interpretation of what this code section means, and then pursuant to what this code section means, what authority is actually given to the State Allocation Board in the determining of the creation of the budget, and should the board be creating the budget and giving it to DGS, or should DGS create the budget and then the board just takes action for approval? So I think there is inherent base confusion on this of who's on first and who's on second.
Mr. Ferguson, can you shed any light?
Yes, yes, Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. With deference to what Senator Lowenthal is requesting, the information is readily available in the governor's budget on a 3-year period. We're more than happy to work with the Office of Public School Construction to provide that snapshot over time. The information, again, is already publicly available, so we will do that for you. In terms of the statutory authority.
I think, can I just interrupt you for a second? I think Senator Lowenthal asked for 5 years, but would 3 years work for you?
Just 3 to 5, just, I need,
Okay.
I'm not asking for a specific, just so I can understand what these numbers mean. If you're asking me to vote, how do I?
Right, okay. I just want to make sure. Go ahead.
Correct. Even at the 5-year level, previous budget acts, we would be able to get that information out of that to provide the data requested. In terms of statutory authority, the Budget Act does provide statutory authority for the funds provided to the Department of General Services, the California Department of Education, the California School Finance Authority. So there is some statutory authority to provide for those administrative funds. I think the question that you're providing today is this merely an ministerial act, or does the board also have to approve that administrative cost within the amount that's set by the Annual Budget Act, if I'm clarifying what you're requesting?
And do we have an answer to that question?
We have an answer to that? Okay, looking at the statute, it is not well worded, but the board is required to provide those amounts that are necessary for the Department of General Services to conduct its business for the board. Now, that being said, the question is, who determines and how do you determine what is necessary? An argument can be made, and there's some ambiguity here. An argument can be made that the determination of what is necessary to conduct the business of the board has already been made through the budget process and through that mechanism, if you will. There is a phrase in here that Senator Lowenthal rightly points out that says that the board determines necessary. So I think there is an opportunity there that if the board determines that some amount is not necessary, that they may be able to call into question that. That runs in conflict with the fact that the budget process presumably has determined that this is the necessary amount. So I know that's not a non-answer, but that's the interpretation of the statute that exists.
Mm-hmm. Senator Hancock.
Thank you. And that was actually very clarifying of what the lack of clarity is, and I appreciate that very much.
I didn't write that, so I can only interpret it.
So you could do that. But I have a number of questions about this information and the way it's displayed and what the discretion of the board is. For example, we're being asked to approve funds reserved for administration for the 2010 fiscal year. Well, that year is now about three-quarters of the way completed. Should we not, whenever the budget is completed, and it isn't always completed on time, as we know, have this come to the next board meeting or something when, if in fact we were going to have a discussion of what we determine is necessary, it would make a little bit more sense. Because this is, as I understand it, money that comes out of the bond. So it doesn't go to schools. And I believe that as a board, we do have fiduciary responsibility to try to get as much money out into the community as we possibly can. So I think we need to look at the timing of a presentation like this. And then secondly, from my information, I believe that there's a number of places where it isn't DGS, the State Controller's Office. Is that under DGS? Is the California Department of Education, which got $2 million, under DGS? Is it? No? And how about the California School Finance Authority? That's in the Treasurer's Office. So the Office of Public School Construction, which is under DGS, gets $13 million. And I think that when this gets to, and then there's these different funds, when this is presented to us, it would really be useful just to have the kind of thing that you generally get in budgets, which is what percentage of the bond is used for administration by anybody. It could be a very small percentage, given what I look at the numbers, but we don't know. And what percent is going to DGS, and is that about the same percentage as other departments take when they take money? That would all be helpful to me, and I would like to know it. Because I do have to, as an aside here, it was a little distressing to me to hear about the move. I think that the Office of Public School Construction really does interact with the legislature and the departments, the Treasurer's Office, CDE and whatnot. And to be over in West Sacramento, essentially, is going to make it harder to do our work. So I wish there was a way that some of those administrative decisions could also at least be presented to the board ahead of time for our comment.
If I may respond to that directly, that was a request from the governor's office. We had 2 weeks in which to comply. We did all the noticing we could. It's what it is. And if we are going to take a look at administrative overhead that's called out in the budget, I'm hoping we would do it for all of the other departments which support us. Because
yeah, no, that would make total sense, rather than just kind of numbers and we don't know who's where.
But again, I'm going to reiterate the fact that I'm under the impression, and I choose to interpret the code section, as the attorney has said, is a reasonable interpretation, which is you all get your bite of the apple when the budget is being discussed. And when the monies are appropriated at that point, that is when it happens. And this is more like an administrative act, but we certainly have the obligation to make sure you see trends in expenditures over time.
Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, I'm not sure you said that. I think you just laid out both alternatives and said that it was poorly written. I don't think you said that you agree that we don't get a bite at the apple.
I can't comment on that. What I can comment on is the fact that the statute specifically refers to the Budget Act process.
But it also refers to the role, right, specifically of the board, too.
And it's not entirely clear what that role is. I will say this, it would be, if the board chose to go that way, perfectly reasonable for the board to rely on the budget process and say that that's the process that by which it deems it reasonable.
But if we chose not to do that, if we chose to have some say in terms of how that money is allocated.
There's a little bit of a distinction that needs to be made. It's not that the board has any say, necessarily the say in how that money is distributed. The board has the opportunity, or has the responsibility to determine that those funds are necessary. It's a different standard. It's not a matter of choosing how funds are made. Where the board can intervene is if they make a determination that certain funds are not necessary.
And if we do make that determination that funds are not necessary,
then that creates the issue with that particular, because that runs contrary to the Budget Act and that process. So, again, that is, the statute creates a way for the board to get someplace where it's at odds with the Budget Act, which is why I said that it's not a particularly well-written statute for that reason.
Or is it potentially saying that the board shall determine the amounts necessary and then work with the legislature before it's adopted in the Budget Act?
That's possible. That would be a reasonable interpretation to, for lack of a better term, harmonize those two concerns.
Okay, what's the board's pleasure on this item? Clearly, we need more information. We had a minimum need 3 years, a 3-year look back, and at a minimum, we need the percentage of admin costs as it relates to the bond funds.
Right. And we actually, specifically for percentage-wise, I believe the overall administrative cost to the program is less than 1%. I mean, it's probably even 0.5%. So, but, I mean, definitely we could provide you more detail, but I don't know specifically if you were talking about departmental overhead charges. I think that issue was being raised earlier. I'm not real clear, but, I mean, we can provide you that level of detail, if that's necessary. I mean, definitely we can provide you that level
And
of detail.
I also think that we should take into account, I think it was Senator Hancock, but I was wondering myself at our first meeting when this was originally on our agenda, why are we doing it 6 months after the Budget Act was enacted? It seems to me it's a contemporaneous, or either immediately before, or immediately after kind of thing, but we can work on that next year.
Right, we were working, yeah, exactly. I think most
By
of
the time we approve it for 2009, 2010, we'll be in 10, 11, because I'm
right.
positive the legislature will act promptly. Senator Lowenthal.
could we, as long as we're gone, and I think what I'm hearing is that we may lay this over for a month until we get, maybe even longer, because we don't even know what our role is in this. But if there are changes, I would like to see some explanation in why there are some dramatic changes, if there are. I don't know if there are changes or not. And I also saw there was some general, I just don't understand when it says internal contracts, external contracts. What does that all mean? And so I'd just like greater breakdown of that, not saying just to understand what they really are.
And the other thing I hope we do is show actual expenditures, because those dollars are what were appropriated. And I know
Correct.
we're not spending anywhere near those dollars.
Correct. Those are just encumbrances, but we're not nowhere near those expenditure amounts at all.
Because you're presenting more of a pro forma statement.
It's
than
just
an
that we're
actual-
just presenting the item as overhead.
So you just lifted it straight out of the Budget Act?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And just as a point of clarification, as I've heard differing opinions on the State Allocation Board, that maybe we should seek kind of further clarification and understanding of what the roles and the responsibility of the State Allocation Board as defined in the Education Code, and specifically ask the AG's office to provide maybe a legal counsel or opinion. Mr. Nanjo, no offense, but I would find it a bit of a conflict of interest, since you are a DGS employee and a DGS attorney, to make such a recommendation.
No offense taken.
I'm wondering also, Chair, if it's appropriate to be discussing the current budget as opposed to, during the current budget process, as you suggested. We're in that process right now. Should it be at the same time that we are reviewing something that actually is still actionable?
I would say we better postpone that until we get clarity on whose authority this is. And again, I look forward to it, because we are part of the governor's budget. legislature acts on it, that's where the appropriations are made, just like they are for you.
Senator Lowenthal.
Since this is statutory authority that was, and that we're questioning really what that statutory authority, I would like the Ledge Council to also opine on it. They are the ones that would know really what our statutory authority is. So I think if we're going to get a ruling, not just the AG, we need the Legislative Council.
Okay.
I will happily work with our executive officer to make sure that we ask the appropriate questions, and they're the same as given to both.
That sounds good. I don't think OPSC can ask for a legislative council opinion, though, so can you? Do you have a legislative council privileges?
No.
I do. I mean, I can on the behalf of the department, my department. Anyway, we can work on it. Okay. We'll bring that item back. May not be till May. Depends on how long it takes you to put this all together.
Right, right. And so I want to be clear that you want 3 years of budget level detail specifically?
Yes, and some breakdown in terms of when there's an increase, and some of the items are more of a breakdown, such as the internal and contracts and the external. What does that mean? I have no idea, and maybe some of, we're talking about what you talk of, there's a lot of amount of money to legal counsel. How much is that, and if you could break that down also.
So are you specifically just referring to the DGS line items on tab attachment 5, or are you talking about other
Also the
administrative
Attorney
costs and other
General.
programs?
I would look at, to me.
I think we should look at
all of it.
All of it, right.
It's what our authority is over, especially if, as council said, it's about whether they're necessary, we need to consider whether they're necessary over all the
overarching.
places that our bond funds go to, I would think.
Yes.
This may be a rhetorical question, but
Excuse me, Assemblywoman Brownlee's been trying to ask a question for a while.
Well, I guess the other question that I had is that what we see here relative to the budget, if we were over in the legislature in a budget subcommittee hearing and looking at this particular budget, what would we see? Would we see one line item, great detail of this particular budget? Detail. Okay, and then the other question, too, is there authority and flexibility between these accounts? In other words, you spend very little in one account, you get to transfer that money to another line item for expenditure there, if needed?
I think it's specifically designated for a fund.
If I may, I believe our CDE line is a one-line item in the budget. Am I correct, Chris? We're one line, so if you, as a legislator, were looking at our at the budget that you got the detail of in here, you would have seen the bottom dollar amount, the $2.5 million. Well, it was changed over time because of, we took the cut like everybody else, took it in personnel, we took it in other areas.
Right.
But that's what you would see, one line item, dollar amount.
That would be correct.
And this does look like a little bit of money relative to, the scale of a bond, but when we're over in the legislature talking about budget, we're quibbling over $500,000 and $1 million and $2 million. I mean, it's, because, there's so many, we're looking at so many cuts and deep cuts. And so anyway, I think we're certainly looking at a level of detail now, more now than we have been.
Mr. Ferguson, did you want to?
No, I was just going to say the line item for Department of Education is item 6110-001-6057, and it is one line item. I believe DGS's entry is 3 line items. I don't have the specific numbers, but they're in Organization 1760. They are available. All of the information being requested is publicly available. The adjustments are publicly available. They're made through either baseline adjustments or through budget change proposals. They're heard in, I believe, Subcommittee 4, Budget Subcommittee 4, which I believe Assemblymember Brownlee is a member of. Correct. So she will be hearing those this year in the budget process. But that's all publicly available information, and we're more than willing to share that with the board.
Okay, did you want to say something else, Mr. Harvey?
I just want to make certain we seek the legal counsel that is the most objective and clean hands. Ms. Kaplan has raised a concern about Mr. Nanjo, even though I think he's our counsel. He is a DGS employee. I'm wondering if there's not a potential conflict for ledge counsel to render an opinion, given the fact that this body is positioned with legislators. I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I would argue that the AG should be that one voice. We shouldn't get multiple opinions.
I think it doesn't hurt to have multiple opinions, but although it's sort of hurt us to date, because they're all over the map, so.
I'm at the
obviously-
will and the pleasure of whatever the board directs me to do.
Well,
The Ledge Council is independent. It is not, and it drafted the legislation, and I think that it'd be appropriate to get their interpretation. Not as the only one, you can have others, but I think that'd be totally appropriate. I don't think they're there to promote one side or the other. They represent both parties, and they're, of all the attorneys, the most independent.
okay, well, I think we decided, I mean, are we going to talk to both the AG and Ledge Council?
And are we seeking DGS counsel as well, as an opinion?
Sure. Why not? We can pick the best 2 out of 3.
When we ask for an AG opinion, do we pay for that, or?
Yes. We pay for it.
We pay?
Yes.
I thought Tom was working for free. Okay. All right, moving on to tab 16, Masha Lutzig again.
All right, here we're going into our regulation section, and tab 16 deals with Career Technical Education Facilities Program. It was set up within Assembly Bill 127, Proposition 1D, and it was set up as a competitive program with funding cycles. And we're entering our 3rd funding cycle with about $90 million available for projects. We expect that we'll be oversubscribed for the money. First step in the process is program approval by California Department of Education, and their approvals to date for these projects will exceed our available bond authority, so we expect this 3rd cycle to be highly competitive. When the law directs us to provide grants for career tech facilities for costs uniquely related to building, designing career tech facilities in various industry sectors. In developing the regulations, with input from the implementation committee, we presented and the board approved regulations that provide 2 options for applying for the funds. One is construction-ready projects with projects fully designed and ready to be built after apportionment, and a second option, which was referred to as reservation of funds apportionment, again, set up through regulations, not specifically contemplated in statute. And the reservation of funds apportionment was to accommodate those districts that may be hesitant to commit design funds and without having a assurance of SAB funding for this brand-new, highly competitive program. So that option was set up, and in administering the program and going through 1st cycle and 2nd cycle, we've identified an issue that I'll describe shortly. Just to backtrack a little bit, for the reservation of funds project, to retain its approval for funding, the district must go through the design process, receive approval from the state architect and Department of Education, and submit to us a complete application within 12 months of the reservation of funds. That 12 months has recently been extended to accommodate for the issues surrounding fiscal crisis and processing abilities and things like that. But for this 3rd funding cycle, that option is not available. So these projects will, after they're apportioned, truly apportioned, will be coming back to our office with a application approval within 12 months. What comes with that, too, is the final cost estimate. And the difference is that a reservation of funds apportionment is based on a preliminary cost estimate. The project hasn't been fully designed. The costs are not well known. With a fully designed project, there is a final cost estimate that we review. And what happens is on many projects, we recognize that the final justified project costs are less than the reservation of funds apportionment. And we do not have a mechanism to adjust for that. That creates a couple of issues. That creates an imbalance and an inequity with those applicants that are applying and receiving an initial apportionment based on a final cost estimate. Those are the construction-ready projects, and provides kind of an incentive to perhaps apply for a reservation of funds to allow for additional funding to be used for any unexpected costs. And the second issue is that any project savings, and this program does not allow for savings to be retained, unlike other SFP. The project savings do come back to the program to fund additional projects, but not until the time of audit. So this, we're presenting a proposal which would revise the process a little bit, and we're attempted to show it to you visually on stamp page 178. In the middle of the page, we are presenting the proposed process for reservation of funds application, and this would require a small change in our regulations, which we're also presenting as part of this item. And not changing the process for applying for funds. Funding application can be submitted to the office with preliminary cost estimate, and we'll present that to the board for reservation of funds. Project will get designed, receive CD and DSA approvals, and come into our office with the final cost estimate. And for many projects that won't be an issue because they're over the funding cap anyway, but if in case the final cost estimate comes in and it's less than what the board reserved for the project, we will go back to the board and ask for that reservation to be reduced, and then fund the project based on a final cost estimate, essentially making it an equal playing field with those projects that have already received funding based on a final cost estimate because they were construction ready. So the proposal has been initiated by our office, and it has been presented to the implementation committee, which is what we do with all the proposals for regulation changes. There were numerous concerns, and to address them, we are also proposing that if we do move forward with reducing reservation of funds apportionment, that we provide all projects with a small allowance for unforeseen circumstances, in addition to typical allowances for inflation of 5%, 2.5% of which would be the state share. And that would apply, again, equally across the board for those projects that are ready to build and those projects that do not have their ready-to-build plans until 12 months within the reservation of funds. So the options are outlined on stamp page 179. Our recommendation is to adopt option 1, which would be to move forward with this regulation revision. And option 2 would be to take no action. We could still proceed with the funding cycle that we have currently pending. It's just we would not be able to recoup any funds for any future funding cycles early, and we would also be potentially creating an incentive for folks to apply for reservation of funds option, as it's a more safer option against unforeseen costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
I do have a few comments. I think this is an interesting policy discussion, actually, about whether we want to recoup money that we gave out so that we can reallocate it if we think it's not going to be needed, because I think final closeout can take a very long time, can't it? Up to 6 years or something? Yeah. So that you have a lot of money sitting around not being used. Do we prioritize shovel-ready projects so that all of the shovel-ready projects will go out first?
Not in this program, no. There's an equal chance for competing for the funds between those projects that are, as you may say, shovel-ready and those that are applying for reservation of funds. It's simply that the funds that we're reserving are reserved based on two different principles. Finalized cost or cost on the final cost estimate versus a preliminary idea for a project that has not been designed.
Okay, and I don't actually know, I'd have to think myself about the equity of doing that if we're trying to get the money out the door, although I realize there are people who may have a wonderful idea and they don't have money for design. Right? But it would seem to me that we would want the money to come back in. My other question would be, who can actually make this determination? Is this a legislative determination or a simple change of regulation?
We believe that there is an ability by the board to adopt regulations, as the board did initially with adopting regulations that allowed this reservation of funds option in the first place. So there is, there is ability to outline in regulations how the reservation of funds apportionment is finalized when the district submits the complete application. So yes, it's a regulatory action.
Okay. Whereas the reason we need legislation, which I do have in SB 1380, is because we want to shift money that isn't being used in one bond account to the CTE account, which is depleted. Yeah? Okay. I think that we really ought to consider trying to prioritize these shovel-ready projects in some way. Just because we don't have enough money for all the schools that are interested, and we would want to get the money out into the community as fast as possible. However, if there's a policy reason why that isn't a good idea, I'd like to know what it is.
If I may, I guess I'm going to come at this from a different direction in support of option 2, and that is not to take action. And the reason I believe that is on two fronts. One, from our superintendent's perspective, in terms of a very, very strong support for career technical education. I think that the people that put the career technical education into the bond bill had a strong advocacy and support for that. And districts were capped at the amount of money that they could use for this program, up to $1.5 million, and up to $3 million matched by each of them. And we capped them already in terms of the career technical education, and we know, as you indicated, there are projects that are above that as well, and that districts are giving more to. What this is asking is to recoup savings earlier in the process, and I think it's also kind of retroactive to these districts that have been out there operating in this system where they believe they have $3 million, and they justified that in the first round. They went through 14-day approval, 14-day letters, 4-day letters. They had to justify that amount, and they got either $3 million or up to it, whatever they could justify. I am not supportive of taking that amount now earlier in the process because we don't know, they aren't bid yet. We want to see a quality career technical education project built, and that they're saying here there's some that fall in that category. I don't think it's compelling enough to make a policy change there that we're being asked to in regulation. That's one piece of it. Fully supporting career technical education, wanting them to have enough money to do a quality project. The second piece of it is we called this, and they are apportionments. Whether the term reserved apportionment is before it or not, it is an apportionment. And I believe that it's full and final at the time that this board made that apportionment, and it can be recaptured, the savings can be recaptured as all other apportionments are during the audit process. So I wouldn't support that we change in midstream
to capture money earlier. I think it's nickel and diming a program that we haven't yet seen come to fruition.
Any other comments for board members?
Question. You know, I'm not sure whether, is there a way in which, you know, to prioritize shovel-ready projects, or is that, since there is such a long list of apportionments that there is, and some are ready and some aren't, but we've already made the commitment, that there is no way in which to shift things around to prioritize projects that are ready to go?
I think that's a larger policy regulation change discussion that while we had that discussion at implementation committee and I gave you notes that maybe it's a OPSC and I need to look into it and bring back to the board so it's a comprehensive discussion. Although CTE is part of the issue with what's out there and what's been funded but not moving, I would hate for us, if there's direction to look into it and bring it back, great, but these changes won't affect what's shovel-ready and getting out there faster.
Mr. Harvey?
I was leaning toward option one for the same reasons that Senator Hancock may be leaning that way, and in part, I need to know a little bit more about your phrase that you're getting the dollars back from overestimated projects earlier on. So it seems to me you've made a judgment call that some projects you have perhaps a public policy reason to bring back the money because they were overestimated. Can you tell me what that means? Because it makes it easier for me to support option one if I'm not going to be punishing in somehow those who in good faith have got a solid and accurate and good estimate. But overestimate makes me want to get the money back a little earlier so they can go to someone else and good will come of it.
If I may respond to that, the overestimating piece shouldn't be interpreted as anything negative. I think it's just part of the business of estimating is whenever with a preliminary estimate, without having the plans laid out with full measurements, it's natural to build in certain allowances for unknown. So it's natural. It's not always. Sometimes maybe the scope of the project goes above and beyond what was originally envisioned, but it's natural for earlier estimates to be higher than the final cost estimates once the project is fully designed. So it could go another way. Like I said, we could have, and we probably do have projects that, you know, estimated that they maybe could fit into the 3 million cap, for example, that realized later on that they can't for whatever reason. But on a typical project that doesn't change in scope too much, it's natural for a preliminary idea to be greater than the final cost is, just because you want to protect yourself against any kind of, you know, adjustments. And I think, you know, even most of the cost estimating gurus would give you design contingencies on a cost estimate for a project that is not fully designed. In other words, like say a 10%, for example, design contingency. That's natural. And since I have the mic, I also wanted to address the issue about the apportionment being full and final. There is an overriding older statute under the SFP that states that the total funding provided under this chapter shall constitute the state's full and final contribution for the project. And it does specifically then refer to actually new construction, but we've been, that statute has been applied overwhelmingly to SFP. Like I said, again, the reservation of funds option was built into the CTE regulations at the discretion of the board. It is not an apportionment for main two reasons. It is not based on a complete application. And again, overriding SFP statute requires a district to come in to the office with a complete funding application outlining all the allowances that they believe they're eligible for and including approval from DSA and CDE. That's one. And the second thing, an apportionment typically represents a project that is ready to submit a fund release. An apportionment is reservation of funds, and the next step for the district is to meet the requirements for fund release, whatever they may be. For most of them, it's enter into a contract for CTE that doesn't exist, which is another huge incentive for CTE projects. But these projects that receive a reservation of funds, they're not ready for fund release. The regulations clearly require them to bring to our office the final documents that make their application complete, and only after accepting those documents, we provide a district a letter that allows them to then submit a fund release. So for those main two reasons, these reservation of funds apportionments are not apportionments. Hindsight, we believe we should have called them something else, like just reservation of funds, and not include the word apportionment, because that is now being used to deem these reservations as full and final. Hindsight. But again, I firmly believe, just from reviewing the prior notes, that this particular scenario of a final justification coming in at a lesser amount just was not thought through. We identified that in our review, and we thought it was our responsibility to bring that forward to the board to address, like I said earlier, for the main two reasons: for equity in the program and maximizing the use of funds. Thank you.
Ms. Moore has a question. Well, I promise we're getting to you.
We are not, though, we are only decreasing project costs, correct? So if I'm a district in your proposal, in proposal number option 1, if I'm a district that asked for 2.5 million, that's what I thought, and lo and behold, I need 3 million, we're not going to, they can't come in with their final cost estimate justifying 3 million and increase their amount. Am I correct?
That's correct. It could be accommodated perhaps in future rounds of this program if we set up some sort of a reserve, but at the inception of the program, that wasn't set up, so there wouldn't be any way to fund that increase from in the current structure of the program. But yeah, definitely thought of something, for purposes of equity in the future. There'd be something to be talked about as far as increases.
Mr. Duffy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Tom Duffy again for cash. We disagree with, respectfully so, with Ms. Lutzik. This program is a very different program, and it was put together in a different way because of the support by everyone across the board for career technical education. The apportionment that is made is an apportionment. You heard Mr. Patton say to you earlier tonight that once you make a decision, once you make an apportionment, it can't be reversed. So there are districts relying upon apportionments that you made for this program that were real apportionments back in December 2010. I think it was December the 10th, or 2008, December the 10th. We don't know where this program will go. It not only is that different about the program, the program, and it was described for you to a degree, the program is a competitive process that goes to CDE, goes to OPSE, comes to you where the apportionment is made, and districts know they have funds that they can rely upon and that they're not going to be taken back. So that the districts then begin to go through the planning process, they go to CDE, they go to DSA, and they come back to OPSC. They don't come to you again. So we disagree fundamentally that this is not an apportionment. There are other programs that OPSC administers and that you grant funding through that have contemplated in advance that you would provide a certain level of funding. The Critically Overcrowded Schools program is one. The charter program is another, where you give a preliminary apportionment, and it's preliminary in order to give them an opportunity to rely on certain funds for a longer period of time, and then they come back to you for a final apportionment, and they go through the process that OPSC that Masha has just described. So not to belabor this, we absolutely believe you made apportionments, and you don't have the authority, based upon what Mr. Patton said, to go back and say, we want to winnow through those and take funds back. I appreciate very much, Senator, what you were saying about trying to put more projects out there, because this is certainly a popular program. But we haven't been able to even determine what may be shovel-ready. We called a meeting last week of the 3 agencies that administer to this program, plus Ms. Kaplan at our offices. Unfortunately, 2 of the agencies weren't able to come to the meeting. The importance of that meeting was to be able to find out a way to track career technical education projects so we could know what projects are at DSA, at OPSC, or maybe getting ready to go to the street. And again, this program is designed differently. But these are apportionments, and we believe that your staff's recommendation to do something different is really something that is not proper. Thank you very much.
Ms. Green?
Thank you. Is it true we're giving an incentive to go through the reservation process? Because if the apportionment is set, then when they come back with their final cost estimate and it's lower, they have squeeze room in their actual apportionment that the shovel-ready do not have in theirs.
That's correct. Just to qualify that is correct. But for projects that are very large, CTE facilities that are very large, that are going to exceed the cap no matter what they are funded at, it probably does not make a difference. But there are a lot of projects in this program, and we have yet to see what's come in for this third cycle, but there are a lot of smaller projects. The program does allow for funding for equipment only, for example. This wouldn't apply to them, but there are a lot of other smaller projects in the program. So yes, for projects that fall under the cap, this would provide an incentive to participate in the reservation of funds option.
Did you have a comment, sir?
I did. Ron Pergham, WLC Architects. I'd just like to mention that I'm reinforcing what Ms. Moore had to say. Often, a principal and an M&O director and a teacher will come up with a program and submit it, and bless their hearts, they do a good job and they get the grant. Believe it or not, last week we just interviewed for a project that has to be turned into DSA on the 1st of December. Architect was never contacted. So their estimates aren't anywhere close to what probably the final estimates to be. And so if you're going to try and go in and recoup the money even before the architect gets in there, and that's what we're talking about with a lot of these projects, I think you're better off waiting until the time when you go in and audit, because I think you'll find that the estimate given by the audit, by the architect, is a lot more accurate than what some of the estimates are.
Assemblyman Torlakson?
Thanks. I want to agree with the comment of the last gentleman and with Ms. Moore. I just have a general concern. This program actually, I think, was one of the major selling points of the bond issue, and how it's implemented and how smoothly it rolls out, or how fairly it appears to roll out, I think is very important for the next bond issue. And also, our career tech programs have been just slammed hard, everything up and down because of the other budget cuts. So the ability to get everything as tidy as you might like, or as clear, I think, is diminished by all the other trauma that adult ed and career tech programs are facing. So I'm more in the line of let's sort of wait and hold it and go along with Ms. Moore's comments.
And I would like to just add to that. First of all, I just really want to compliment Ms. Lutzik. I don't know if I said your name quite right, but this item was really well done. I had all the information that I needed, and I appreciate your presentation. But I agree with Assemblyman Torlakson and with Ms. Moore that this CTE right now is at a delicate spot. We need to move forward with the program as it is, see how it goes, and continue to watch it. But we have to get these programs to thrive, and I think that we're better off leaving things the way they are than moving into something new. So I don't think we really need a motion.
We don't need to vote on taking no action.
Unless you want.
No, I don't actually, because I think many of you know that I have been championing CTE for a very long time as well, and really wanted it included in this bond. And also want to see as many examples out there as we possibly can have. But I have been persuaded by the discussion. That's why I said I want to hear the policy implications of this before we do anything. And since the money is being spent at a fast clip, right, our problem is the reason to even consider doing this was so that we have a little more money to put out in new projects. Could we get a report from staff when you can, because there's a lot going on right now, but of what percentage were reserved apportionment, what percentage were shovel-ready, what kinds of projects were they? I'm very interested because we're also trying to align our career technical education academies with what we think are the sunrise industries in California. And so I'd be very interested if you could just give us an idea of where the grants went and which of these two categories they fell into.
Yes, we definitely can do that. And if I may, just to alleviate concerns maybe from the field and to crush my own glory, and thank you for the compliments, we did leave something out here, and that's because of the many revisions that we went through. We did want our proposal to apply to third cycle projects only, so I don't want to create any scares out there in the field that we were planning to do something different than we already said we would. So just wanted to read that correction into the record, please. Thank you.
And I would like to add also to just the compliments of the staff work we've been getting. It's very helpful.
Thank you. We'll share with staff at the office.
I just wanted to add, we'd be happy to provide the information. You know, the Department of Education had quite a part in this around all the different industry types. We have it by industry type. I know probably OPSC does as well, but we'd be happy to do that. As they came into our office, it was very interesting where the concentration was and what types of projects people asked for. I think the board would find very valuable information, and we'd be happy to provide that as well.
That would be totally fabulous. Because I'm interested in, again, how we really align systems. And I know at one point the university said they'd had all these thousands and thousands of courses approved for A to G. Well, it turned out, which is fine, but it raises issues. Really, almost the majority of them, or it seemed like it, were in photography. Well, I'm sure it's a great career area, but maybe, biotechnology would be better. So I'd love to see the actual list.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can see that, I mean, there's the 15 pathways, and you can see what the concentration of how the projects fell out by pathway. And I think we were very interested in the information as well, and we'd be happy to share.
Oh, that's wonderful. I hope we accept.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts from the board? Motions? Okay, then we'll move on to tab 17. You again.
Thank you. This is a follow-up to last month's discussion for modernization projects. And this is this item addresses the grant that we have for accessibility and fire code requirements for whenever modernization is performed on the site. Code compliance requirements kick in, and we refer to it for simplicity as accessibility, but it captures both ADA and fire code requirements. At the last meeting, based on prior board direction, we wanted to confirm the one or the other of the two options for funding of this grant. The board confirmed that they'd like to proceed with funding both, continue to fund both grants. However, that left out a small population of modernization projects that actually use mod money to replace buildings. We refer to it as replacement in like kind. Under existing regulations, which we're moving forward with based on board's direction, do not allow those projects the option for funding. All they get is a flat allowance. And that was based on an earlier misunderstanding that if you're replacing a building, all the code compliance costs are embedded in the design of the new building. Well, the stakeholders informed us that that's not necessarily true. There could be code compliance items that could be itemized that are located on the site, like ramps or special parking lots, things like that. Or there could be other buildings in the project that are getting true modernization, and they also could come up with a itemized list of costs, and we could provide funding based on those actual costs. So the purpose of this item with the regulation language on stamp page 183 is to truly provide both funding options to all modernization projects. So that's the first piece of the proposal. And what we're doing on stamp page 183, we're actually striking out text, and that text reads that if you're doing like-for-like replacement, you're only allowed a 3% option. By striking that out, we're basically providing an option to everybody. We're not excluding anybody from, so it's a strange thing that we're doing. We're usually adding reg text, not deleting it, but here, by deleting the language, we are expanding the options to all the projects. So that's the first issue, and on that one, we are asking for the board to approve our regulatory amendments. On the second issue that's related to this item is, that's related to the documents required. As you've heard earlier, our programs are very structured in a way that ensures that applications that come into the door at OPSC are complete, and they're all competing on the same basis. Our forms that are used for applications also outline the requirements for submittal, what documents must be submitted with the application, such as DSA approval, for example. And currently, our forms, which are presented in this item as an attachment, they say that regardless whether you choose a flat % allowance or funding based on actual or estimated costs, we want a checklist. And the checklist is a list of items that may include ramps, widening doors, drinking fountains, what may have you, for accessibility, sprinklers, whatnot. And that is a document that's required for all projects. And the purpose of that was to ensure that we have the data needed to make the decision on how to best fund this work. Well, since the decision's been made to go forward with both options, the question is there still a need to collect this data? As a pro, this data on all projects would inform future decisions on accessibility funding. As a con to that is an extra cost and time for school districts, their architects, DSA, to prepare, review, and approve these checklists. So the weighing of that and weighing the balance between those two options, we're asking the board for direction. So we're presenting two types of options here: continue asking for a checklist for all mod projects, or only requiring districts that are asking for funding based on the checklist to submit the checklist, and free everybody else from the need to do that. So that is the options that we're presenting, and on that one, we're simply asking for board's direction. And if the last thing we're asking is to authorize the executive officer to file the regulations and form changes with the Office of Administrative Law. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments?
So do you like option 2? Well, is that what it is? Because then another recommendation is attachment A.
On attachment A is not related to the options. On attachment A.
I understand that, but that's what I wondered about I'm asking about the options. And I understand that attachment A, I'd be happy to move attachment A, I think.
We can do them separately, or we can do it, or we'll do it as one. Separately?
Yeah.
Okay, then go ahead.
Well, I think I would move option 2, which seems to simplify things for smaller projects, and also approve the regulatory amendments in attachment A.
Can I ask a quick question? Wasn't the item we did at tab 5, didn't that give the acting executive officer authority to submit all of our regulations? So we don't need a separate action. We don't have to reauthorize it every time, do we?
No, what you're doing is you're approving her to submit these particular regulations.
I was just picturing it as a full, okay,
Yeah.
thank you, sorry. Mr. Harvey?
Just a point of clarification on the motion, what I thought I heard you say was the board direction has been to allow both options. And right now, if you collect the data, it is time-consuming for districts and time-consuming for you, and there are some costs. Are you suggesting that it does make sense on the 60%? Or are you saying because of the time and the cost and the fact we're doing both options anyway, that you don't need that checklist for either?
I think it would depend, maybe my personal opinion, on whether we have, on a short term, with a short-term goal in mind of funding the project, it does seem that it's unreasonable to ask districts to have to compile a checklist. However, for them to also even evaluate which option gives them more money, would need some kind of analysis that equates to the checklist. And secondly, in our program, we're constantly handicapped by the lack of data. With the grant program that is set up on grants, it is very difficult to respond to questions about, well, what does it actually cost? So collecting data, continuing to collect data, does have a long-term benefit to address that handicap. So option one right now would not require any change. Everyone that's coming in to a modernization program and asking for accessibility funding, which I'm not sure whether most projects would probably, nothing would change. They would continue to submit the checklist. Review part on our end is not laborsome. It is not a big part of the review that we do on modernization projects. But for districts, we have heard concerns that architects will perhaps charge additional fees to develop that checklist.
Option one gives you the data collection going forward that would inform you, and you're saying there is some value in that.
Over the years, what's been shown to us is any data that we can get on even estimated costs brings a tremendous amount of value for any decision-making on grants, bonds, et cetera.
Thank you.
Is there any public comment on this item?
I'll second the motion.
I thought we had a second.
Option two.
It's just we
And
prefer
A.
option two. Madam Chair, members, thank you.
Pardon?
We prefer option two. I think
thank
that's
you.
where you're going.
I think we have a motion and a second. Do you want to go ahead and call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah.
Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Torlakson? Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Lynn Green?
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant?
Aye.
Carries.
I think we covered, her motion had both parts in it.
Just to clarify, that motion was for option two, and it was also to authorize the executive officer to submit attachment A, regulatory amendments, and the form changes. So you covered everything I think you need to. Thank you.
Great, we're doing so well. Now moving on to reports, tab 18. I just want to just say one thing about reports really quick. I may have mentioned this last time, but we've had situations in the past where we haven't made it through the binder, and the reports have just been in there. And so in order to kind of have a more formalized process on reports, I was hoping that we could get a vote on, not a vote, but a motion on accepting the reports. Doesn't mean we approve them, doesn't mean we agree with them, it just acknowledges that we have them. That way, in the future, if we get to a place where we don't finish the item, if we've never accepted it, then it's not deemed as something that's ever been presented to us. So we don't get into that argument about we had a report or we didn't have a report. Tonight we have time, though, to hear briefly on these reports and see if there's any questions from members. And I think we have, what do we have, 4 of them?
Cynthia, Ms. Bryant, I as one board member that would be problematic for me to accept reports that we hadn't heard the items on. Is that what you were suggesting?
No, I'm not. I'm
Okay,
suggesting
then I
that
misunderstood you.
we could get to, there could be a report that we don't really have to have a major discussion on, and we just move on. But and I think this is something too, Senator Hancock, that we could work into the rules discussion. But I think what I'd like to see us do is have some sort of an action on the reports. That way, no one in the future can say, you never,
absolutely.
ever, you didn't listen to
Once
them.
we hear them individually.
No one can come back to us and say, well, that was on,
I support that.
That was on, yeah, okay, that's what I'm trying to get to. But I'd like us to get through them, and I think we're going to finish the agenda again today, people. Just means that we heard it, that. We can, and we don't have to do it. We don't have to do it today. I'm just suggesting that.
Let's think about it.
I just don't want, I want to avoid the situation that we've had where, well, that was in a report and it was never taken up, or the board just rushed through it at the end of the meeting. And so if we get to the report and we actually consider it, I was hoping that we would end up with a permanent record of an acknowledgement that we had heard it.
What if you didn't accept it?
we could reject it. I'm not, maybe accepts, well, maybe we don't even have to do this. Maybe I can defer this to Senator Hancock's Rules Subcommittee. And when we get to this point, we're in the transcript, we had a discussion about these reports, we know we've heard them.
How about we receive the report? That way you're not accepting it or denying it, just we receive the report.
I will say, however, that reports do come back, as you indicate, at times, and they are, as part of future discussion. So I think it's important that, as you suggest, that we take an action on the report. And if it's an acceptance, it's an acceptance. If it's a non-acceptance, it's a non-acceptance.
It's just a duly noted.
Right, but there may be a circumstance where a report is not accepted. There may be other circumstances where they are. So I think it's good to note that we did an action on them. Just as we're talking generally about reports, where my concern lies is when we're making policy decisions appear to be made and they are presented as reports that are not actionable items. I think that is not appropriate, and that when that happens, I think we ought to say that's a policy item and it needs to come forward as an actionable item. Thank you.
Well, why don't we, I think tonight we should just go through the few reports we have in front of us, and we're going to have a record of it in our transcript, and so we'll know we've heard these. And it's really a situation of when everyone's walking out the door and the reports are the last 4 items on the agenda. So if we can go through them really fast and adjourn really quickly, that would be incredible.
For purposes of perhaps speeding this along, I'm not, maybe I'll throw a suggestion if whether or not we want to go through the status of fund release reports or the status of funds report, because I know there's other critical reports that we probably want to get to.
Okay.
Yeah, these are ongoing reports that we provide information only, so if you don't know, if that's a suggestion that we would take.
Are there any questions on tab 18 or tab 19? No. And we already did tab 20. Tab 21's removed from the agenda. 22.
The next item deals with the seismic mitigation program. This report really serves 2 purposes. The first is to provide the board with a quarterly report on the seismic mitigation funding activity. If I could direct you to the bottom of stamp page 214, we listed the 3 projects that the board has approved so far under the seismic mitigation program. Those 3 projects total about $4.7 million. That gives us a remaining balance of $194 million in the seismic mitigation program. It's our understanding that there are a couple of other projects that have gone through DSA and received approvals that qualify under the current regulations. We haven't seen those projects yet, but there's an additional estimated cost of about $26 million for those 3 projects that we expect to see in our office soon. The other purpose of the report is to provide the board with an update on requests that the board had made in terms of getting a definition for the imminent threat of collapse. The board had requested that DSA take a look at this and provide a definition for imminent threat of collapse. With us today, we have Ms. Kathy Hicks, representing the Division of State Architect, who's going to provide an update on that analysis.
Good afternoon. Actually, I thought I was here just to answer questions for you, but I'm happy to report that the imminent threat of collapse was a definition that the Division of State Architect determined that we could not come up with a definition because there's no scientific basis for which we would base that it would be too subjective. For the most vulnerable buildings that we were asked to look at, there was actually a U.S., I forgot the name of the organization, but there was actually a scientific adoption of that definition, and we applied it in this case, and then adopted or recommended the types of buildings that would fit with the amount of money that was made available through Proposition 1D for seismic mitigation programs. And also, given the board's direction that when we look at that definition that we not change it in a way that expanded the amount of money that had been made available, changing the definition meant that we couldn't control the number of buildings that may be eligible for funding under the appropriation amount.
Any questions, Senator Hancock?
Okay. And so you've been, the last I heard, you had requested or indicated that if you got $150,000, you could do a study to get a methodology to talk about getting a definition. But have you decided not to pursue that?
The money that was referenced in our report and discussion at the implementation committee was that what we could do to help out with where we were headed was to rank those buildings that were in the category and come up with a methodology for ranking all of the buildings that we'd identified as buildings that had various seismic mitigation issues that we believed possible and that were in areas with this lateral force shake, ground motion intensity that were likely to have the most vulnerable, that fit in that category of where we were, to rank them, and then if you were to look at other criterias to figure out which ones we needed to require to be funded first, we could do that, or apply it in future to use in terms of determining future bond funding needs for seismic mitigation issues. It wasn't going to address the definition at all. We simply cannot come up with a definition for you.
Okay, then I think we've got a problem, because this whole discussion came up around the issue of a district that came in with an evaluation from an engineer saying they were in imminent danger of collapse, but they didn't fit the shaking and the building types that have been adopted by the Division of the State Architect, so they were excluded from applying. And my interest had been is how do we get the definition expanded to include more types of schools, since we've only given 3 grants. And we have people out there that would like to do seismic retrofit on their schools, and they're being told they're not eligible under our present guidelines, but we can't get a different definition because there's no such thing. We need something, everybody, and I'm open to suggestion.
If I might, the real balancing act here is when we asked districts what were the impediments. We heard that it was indeed the shake zone wasn't quite broad enough, so we expanded that a little bit. The building types weren't broad enough, so we expanded that a little bit. The issue of paying for the initial seismic analysis, we've got a pool of money now they can draw down. The remaining obstacle is this question of portable housing. That is temporary housing. If you are indeed wanting to retrofit something, where are you going to put the students? And I have heard that we really have an abundance of schools that meet our criteria, but the idea of finding a place to put students is the major impediment. So the more you spread the definition, you do run the risk of expanding the capable dollars. We've got a definition now that fits that $199 million. We didn't want to go into an unfunded when there wasn't the dollars available. So it is a real quandary. I know the district that you're alluding to could have come under the modernization program and got that other correction handled. So it's awfully hard sometimes to draft a well-intended definition when there may be other ways of skinning the cat. So I'm kind of comfortable at this point staying with where we are because there are multiple avenues to get other dollars. And we have, on more than one occasion, been told by multiple sources that our definitions now probably suck the money up. So I don't know if I want to expand it.
Will probably suck the money up? Because it haven't yet.
No, and the other conundrum is we're not selling any bonds either. So, I don't know. I mean,
We have, can I give you an update, Beth? We did contact all the school districts that had buildings that we believe to be eligible, so that we're sure that DSA has done its due diligence to notify them that this money is available, and that we believe that they have X number of school buildings on their site, so that we will get more active feedback from the school districts that have buildings that we believe on our records to be eligible for the program, so that they, if they can tell us that they already went through any of the modernization programs, already made those seismic retrofits or upgrades necessary, that we can take them off the list and then clear off that list to make room for other buildings to move up. But otherwise, we've identified a liability, and when you start jumping the line, now you've got those sitting there that we said, these were the most vulnerable, we didn't do anything to fix them, we allowed them to stay on the list, and we expanded it to add more. So we are working to identify where everybody is on that list, let them know, then looking at other projects that they have in DSA being reviewed, because one of the things that we heard was that they don't have their local match. So we're also going to be turning over this list to the Office of Public School Construction to see how they're using, what eligibility they have and what other projects they're working on, and how they're proposing to spend any local money that's available already, so that we can try and help them understand that they do have some flexibility to deal with these buildings.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is there is a list of seismically at-risk buildings that have not come forward and requested money.
Yes.
And that it is our intention to inform them that they can come and get money. So we'll also find out if they've already fixed it or torn the building down.
Right.
But we will definitely let them know they've got a problem, so they'll have liability, right? And then are we going to do something to facilitate their coming in? And we think there are enough of those so that the entire rest of the $1.9 billion will be gone.
My intent is to report back to this board to let them know those buildings after we've sent them a letter already, so it's not, we're going to. We've already contacted each of those school districts and identified the buildings. We do have some clarification that they're going to need to provide for us. For example, if the building type was listed as mixed, we can't tell what structures that is and what it applies to, so there's some, if, as you said, they've already removed that building from their site, it's no longer there, and these are old records that we're looking to, so sometimes the school name is changed and things, and completely accurately identifying what's what. We're trying to clarify all of that, and then we can report back to the board. And before we come back, we also wanted to talk to OPSC, share that list, and find out what other eligibility they have for modernization or...
Okay, what's the time frame for this?
Well, it depends on how quickly the school districts and how well they cooperate with us in responding.
It could be years.
Oh, I'm not that patient.
Would it be within 2 months?
When did you make this round of contacts to the school districts?
Within a couple days of attending the implementation committee and giving a briefing.
That was when? Like, was that since our last meeting?
In between, yes.
Pardon?
March 4th?
March 4th. So it's really kind of just gone out. So maybe, I mean, we should probably can we kind of keep getting updated monthly, even if the report is, we don't have any changes yet, just so that, I think we have at least 2 members here who are really concerned about this, and we need to come up with a strategy if it's necessary, if this isn't working. Did you have a comment, Mr. Duffy?
I did, Madam Chair and members. Tom Duffy again for cash. Ms. Hicks is reporting upon a recent contact with school districts. David Thorman, the state architect, asked his staff months and months and months ago to do a similar contact with school districts. We had conversations with DSA representatives and asking about those conversations. And basically the way the program is structured, districts are not encouraged to take the risk to go to their boards and say, we need to move out of this building. And by the way, we have interim housing, and we have a guarantee of getting to these dollars to fix this building or knock it down. So the way the program is structured, and I've been saying this for a long time, and so have others, it's not there to support districts to be able to say, we've got children in this building, and we cannot repair it with the children still in the building, or we cannot knock it down with the children still in the building. So interim housing costs are, and Mr. Harvey and I've discussed this before, and I appreciate you bringing it up this evening. I realize that it's one of those things that you're thinking, well, we're going to take money out of the program that's not going to fix buildings, but you can't do it. The West Contra Costa School District, Senator, Bill Savage, the CAS chair, told me last night that the Portola School, that they're finally believing that they have DSA approval to basically knock down and change. He said, we have to spend $3.5 million on interim housing for the students of that school. It's a reality. You can't touch the building without dealing with that cost. And
That's an allowed cost, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Is that an allowed cost?
No, that's why I'm mentioning this, Senator. It's not an allowed cost. It is not within the program. And we have suggested in documents, letters and other documents that we've shared, that if this program allowed that the engineering cost, and I appreciate reading what I read, Ms. Hicks, about the $200,000 that could be used for engineering costs, may be administered through DSA. That may be very helpful. But that engineering cost and the cost of interim housing and some assurance that the project will indeed qualify. Because once you notify your board that the building is a defective structure and you have no choice, you have to move children out of the facility. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I want to clarify something about the interim housing issue. The seismic mitigation program falls under the facility hardship program. The facility hardship program allows projects that have an imminent health and safety issue to receive funding, which is similar to the seismic program. Under that program, the interim housing is an eligible allowance. It's an eligible expenditure, but there is no additional grant for it. So it's no different with the seismic mitigation program. And unfortunately, we realize that these facilities have an imminent threat, health and safety threat, but since the inception of the program, in terms of facility hardships, we haven't allowed, the program doesn't grant an additional allowance for interim housing for facility hardship projects. So it's similar to seismic. Talking about interim housing is not just a seismic discussion, it also gets into the realm of the facility hardships projects.
If I may. Yeah. I would support also both the concerns raised here about the program. I think we have an identified list. We have people that have not accessed it. They've raised issues of why that we've heard. I think I remember our meeting, I think it was in 2009 down south. We had this discussion, or 2008. Down south, we had this discussion. The same issues were raised at that time. I would say that we can act on this because it's a report, that however, that we really look at that interim housing issue. And if it's true for this program, and I appreciate Mr. Morales talking about it as well for facility hardship, these are extenuating circumstances for districts. It's also incredibly extenuating times for school districts, and that in these two hyper, safety issues, we should be extending anything that we can possible to get these projects done. And if that includes interim housing, I, for one board member, would like to entertain that. So maybe it's time to do that again. If indeed we have identified need, they're not accessing it, and if we have identified need in facility hardship, I'd support that as well.
Would it make sense to refer this to the implementation committee to come back? I mean, I'm just concerned that we have money sitting there unspent. We have needs getting identified, and we don't seem to have a way of moving forward on it.
Well, it seems to me if we know, if we have the data, and if we actually do have a list of schools, and we actually have the data of what the barriers are, and if it is housing that is the barrier, then it seems to me like that we take, this money and carve out a piece that says this is for housing, for interim housing, why they do, and see how it goes. I presume that's not every single project is, housing is the barrier, but it sounds like maybe the preponderance is, and let's give it a go and see if it works.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to do too, but I thought if it went to the implementation committee, and this is thinking off the top of my head, everybody, if it went to the implementation committee, all the stakeholders would then talk about what they obviously know better than we do, which is what the barriers are, and I think one of them at least is interim housing. Are there others? Could they come back to us in 1 or 2 months? In the meantime, the contacting of the schools could continue from the state architect's office, but
I would support that as
we have a
well.
recommendation?
Just so we can.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I know we provided some regulation changes. That was just over the summer, and realized those regulations just went into effect in November of '09. So, I know it's only been a few months, and I know the program is moving slowly, but, it would be probably to our best interest to come back, maybe after we have some updates, what's going on with the contact with DSA is making, before we move forward. Because, I hear what we have limitations here with the amount of monies we can use. And I would hate for us to exceed that limitation, because what if we do get a load of projects coming in, and we may find ourselves in a precarious situation.
I think, make sure that it's clear that what I'm proposing, that DSA and OPSC reach out to these districts that we know that already have the buildings that have been identified as the most vulnerable, and research what it is they have pending, but also reach out to them and help them understand what they can come in for, how we can help them address their problem, and hear from them what their problems are, and then come back to you specifically with the barriers to those school districts that have been identified as the most vulnerable out of the entire list of all the buildings that we're aware of, and deal with that.
I think that's good to go on, and I would encourage you to continue to do that. But I also support the senator's recommendation that it go to the implementation committee, because I'll tell you, it's been a year and a half. It was, as I said, in 2008, the interim housing was an identified issue, and now we're in 2010, and we still haven't addressed it. I would, not as a policy consideration, but as a practical consideration, I would rather that school districts have that money come in, and then we have to deal with, maybe we have 20 million more because of the interim housing, and we have to somehow deal with that. I would rather that we are erring on the side of safety than we are erring on the side of conservatism around the costs.
So to get clarification, so I know as we take it to the implementation committee, what I hear is wanting to be discussed is what's the barrier to the 77 identified projects to coming in and accessing funding. So do we kind of want to limit it to their 77 identified projects and working with DSA to have a discussion of what's, the barrier with those projects, and having a policy discussion, and then if there's solutions or potential recommendations to then bring up to the board to address that? Is that what the board or Senator Hancock you're looking for?
Let me try. Because again, what I was thinking was that we ask the implementation committee to come back to us quickly, like within 2 months, with recommendations from the stakeholders